Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment by yours truly. This is from Chapter 1, The Unholy Alliance of Racism, Genocide, and Guns. In Isaiah 14:21, the Lord tells Isaiah, "Prepare for his sons a place of slaughter because of the iniquity of their fathers." It's a variation on the old story of karma and seems in a very real way to be playing out today in the United States. America is facing an epidemic. Public health officials use that word of gun-related suicides, accidents, and even homicides and police killings. That epidemic has grown worse in the past decade, largely because the number of guns in America has increased, in large part because of the racial fears of white men who have bought guns in record numbers for 8 years during the time in office of America's first black president. A landmark 1999 study from researchers Franklin Zimmering and Gordon Hawkins showed that the main correlation, far surpassing mental illness, socioeconomic status, or race, that could be defined as causal in predicting the rates of gun deaths is a simple number: the number of guns distributed among society. In the 30 years since that study, Zimmering and Hawkins' results have been replicated and reanalyzed dozens of times. As the American Academy of Pediatrics said in a release published in AAAS's Science magazine, quote, "New research shows dramatic differences in the number of children hospitalized and killed each year in the U.S. from firearm-related injuries based on their state's gun legislation, even after adjusting for poverty, unemployment, and education rates. It found twice as many pediatric firearm deaths in states with the most lenient gun regulations compared to states where gun laws are strictest," end quote. They added that this is a critical issue for children, quoting Stephanie Cho, MD, the lead author of the abstract, quote, "Firearm-related injuries are the second leading cause of death among children in the United States. But we found a clear discrepancy in where those deaths happen that corresponds with the strengths of states' firearm legislation. In states with lenient laws, children die at alarmingly greater rates," end quote. And unsurprisingly, America not only has unusually lenient gun laws, but also has more guns in civilian hands than any other country in the world. America has a bit more than 4% of the world's population, but holds almost 50% of all the guns in civilian hands worldwide, more than 390 million guns. And the more guns a society has, the more gun deaths it will experience. The NRA and their army of lobbyists have been quite successful in making this happen. During Obama's presidency, there was a steady and hysterical drumbeat of articles, emails, and political proclamations by so-called pro-gun politicians and think tanks, suggesting that Obama was preparing to take away everyone's guns at any minute. There was even a subtext embraced by the hard right that he wasn't going to stop there. After disarming white Americans, these folks said, Obama was going to intern them in otherwise unused FEMA camps. Flipped-out gun owners were repeatedly arrested during the Obama years trying to break into retired or temporarily vacant military facilities and toxic waste sites, looking for evidence to prove that Obama was, in fact, preparing the modern-day version of the World War II-era Japanese internment camps. White supremacy was the founding notion of this nation. White Europeans thought themselves so superior to the human beings they met here in 1492 that Columbus himself became the first North American slaver, shipping Taino Indians back to Spain as slaves to the royal family. "A slave is as good as gold," Columbus wrote for the king and queen. Europeans in the Americas then stepped up that game into a hemisphere-wide campaign of racial genocide, pulling off the largest multi-generational mass murder in the history of the world. In the midst of that effort, they also created the legal mechanisms necessary to define and legally regulate slavery, and even built those systems into America's founding document, the Constitution. America was birthed in slavery and genocide, and both needed guns. It was the superior weaponry of guns that gave the European settlers a massive advantage over the bow and arrow-equipped Native Americans, and it was the raw power of widespread white ownership of guns in the South that propped up the institution of slavery for hundreds of years. Without guns, neither would have been possible, or at least neither would have been as easy as they were to pull off. And now, after centuries of guns being used to kill off and keep down people of color in America, those same guns are creating a terrifying epidemic of gun-facilitated violence, from public schools to private homes and public concerts. It's enough to make one think that Isaiah was onto something. Chapter 2, The Sanitized History of America. The United States' expansion and conquest in the late 18th century through the 19th century and into the 20th century is a history written by white men, inked in the blood of Native Americans, and built on the broken and bloody backs of enslaved people brought here from Africa. From 1791, when the Bill of Rights went into effect, until the end of the Civil War, the Second Amendment protected the rights only of white men to own guns. This is simply because until the ratification of the 14th Amendment, states determined who was recognized as a person protected under the Constitution. Initially, in most states, that meant that white men who owned land and paid taxes were the only people considered full citizens under the Constitution. In the South, white men with guns formed slave patrols to control slaves and formed posses to hunt escaped slaves. The book, The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, TGIF, Shabbat Shalom, Juma Mubarak, whatever it may be for you, happy Friday. Thom Hartmann here with you. Donald Trump is fleeing New York because they want to look at his taxes, so he's going to bankruptcy-proof Florida. You may not know about this little scam, but it's used by many very wealthy people. It has maintained high property values in Florida. Texas does the same thing, I believe. And that is that the state passed a law a long time ago, I think it was back in the 50s, that says that if you declare bankruptcy in the state, you can keep your home. Now, most states don't have this law. If you declare bankruptcy and you have a house, you have to give up your house. You have to give up basically everything. The only things that you can't discharge in bankruptcy are your taxes and your student loans. Well, that's on the liability side. They stay with you. But you have to sell your home to pay off everything else. You have to sell your car. You have to sell everything you own. But in Florida, you don't have to sell your home. So what rich people do is they buy a major house in Florida. In fact, there was a big scandal about this maybe 3 or 4 years ago. We talked about it on this program at the time, where there was some rich guy, and he moved and he knew that he was in trouble and his company was going down in flames. And so he moved to Florida and bought like a $30 or $40 million house and moved into it so he could say, this is my residence, and declared Florida residency. And then he declared bankruptcy. And, it wiped out a bunch of people that he owed money to. And my recollection is that there were small businesses and contractors. A whole lot of people got screwed really badly, and in addition to his banks and credit cards and everybody else. But he got to keep that $30 or $40 million home. And then after the bankruptcy was all over, he sold that home, moved into a mere $1 million home, which still ain't bad digs, and had $30 or $40 million left over in the bank. Trump right now is trying to sell his Washington, D.C. hotel for $500 million. Good luck with that. And although, maybe he'll find a buyer, who knows. But that, to me, is evidence that he is desperately in need of cash. He has been trying to squeeze cash out of everything. He's squeezing cash out of the U.S. Air Force with their stops in Tunbury. He's trying to squeeze cash out of the G7 with his proposed Doral thing. He had to walk that back because Republicans started freaking out about it. But if they had stayed behind him, you can bet he would have done it. He's squeezing cash out of his rallies. They're selling, made in China merchandise that says "Make America Great Again." I mean, he's got all these scams to make money, which is all he's done his whole entire life. And now another scam. He's going to bankruptcy-proof Florida. And Andrew Cuomo, the governor of New York State, says, good riddance. He never paid taxes here anyway. Yeah, good. Number one. By the way, it's Anything Goes Friday, so whatever you want to talk about, just give us a shout and we'll pick it up. But a few other things in the news today. I got an email just a little while ago from Elizabeth Warren. And, not that I'm special. I mean, me and probably 2 or 3 million people who have made small donations to her campaign. I've made, donations of between $5 and $100 to, half a dozen of the Democratic candidates that I want to follow. It's basically the way that you follow a candidate. My $5 donation to Donald Trump back in 2016 has been paying off really well. I still get his emails every single day. And, he's begging for money like there's no tomorrow. It's pretty mind-boggling. But here's what Elizabeth Warren says. She says, Tom, we need a health care system that reflects our values No American should ever die or go bankrupt because of health care costs, and no for-profit insurance company should be able to stop any American from getting the care they need. Health care is a human right, and that's why I'm fighting for Medicare for all. It's the only plan that gives everyone in America full coverage with the freedom to see any provider with no premiums, copays, or deductibles, no restrictions, no surprises, and no one going broke because they get sick. And then she points out that she's releasing her plan for Medicare for all, which she did today. She did this morning. It's being fact-checked and talked about all over the media. And she says, in fact, my plan won't raise middle-class taxes by 1 penny. In fact, my plan puts $11 trillion back in the pockets of American families by virtually eliminating their current premiums, deductibles, and copays. That's bigger than any tax cut in American history. To cover the cost, she says, we start by taking the money that employers are currently paying in the form of premiums to private insurance companies and have them pay it to Medicare itself instead. I'm happy with that, right? I'm providing, I pay for my health care. I mean, my business, this little business, the Thom Hartmann Program, it pays for my health care and Louisa's. She works on the show. It pays for Sean's health care. It pays for Nate's health care. Our full-time employees are all covered by our health care plan. So I'm already paying that as a small business, as an employer. And if that money needs to be redirected to Medicare, that's fine with me. In fact, I'd be very happy with that, particularly if it gets rid of copays, deductibles, and all that kind of crap that, all of us are having to deal with. She goes on to say, we make up the difference with targeted spending cuts, new taxes on giant corporations, Wall Street, and the richest 1%, and cracking down on tax evasion and fraud. And by the way, that tax evasion and fraud thing, that's not a small thing because of things that George W. Bush did and Donald Trump has done. Both of those presidents reduced funding for the Internal Revenue Service. So the IRS, over the last 20 years or so, has laid off thousands of auditors. And they're left now to the point where they have so few people able to do audits and the necessity of doing some minimum threshold number of audits that they've pretty much stopped auditing really rich people because it's so complex. I mean, it can take 6 months, a year, maybe even 2 years to fully audit the books of somebody like Donald Trump, with 800 or 600 shell companies and front companies and phony baloney companies and a few real companies and, all moving money back and forth in order to minimize taxes. It's just insanely complex. And of course, billionaires can afford to pay, for CPAs to do this kind of stuff. The IRS no longer can. And so there's an estimated $2 billion a year in tax fraud going on, and it may be higher than that. It may be hundreds of billions of dollars. Nobody knows for sure. So then she says, Tom, see it for yourself. Try our new calculator to see our plan for Medicare for all would mean to you. And there's a calculator on her ElizabethWarren.com website where you can actually plug that in. And then she tells a story about her dad's heart attack and how her family kind of went off the rails. And she said, I spent my career studying why hardworking middle-class families were going broke. For years, my research partners and I traveled across the country from bankruptcy courtroom to bankruptcy courtroom, talking directly with people who'd seen their lives turned upside down. And one of the biggest reasons for bankruptcy that we found? Medical problems. In 2007, my research found that the number one reason families were going broke was health care. And 3/4 of those who declared bankruptcy after an illness were people who already had health insurance. Between 2013 and 2016, the number one reason families went broke was still because of health care, even though 91.2% of Americans had health insurance in 2016. Families are getting crushed by health costs. But do you know who's doing great? Private health insurance companies. They're sucking billions of dollars in profits out of the system. Under Medicare for All, we'll rein in the corruption, waste, inefficiency, and corporate profiteering in our healthcare system, and we can pay for it without any new taxes for middle-class families. Existing federal and state spending on healthcare stays about the same. Businesses spending on healthcare stays about the same. Payments just go to Medicare instead of private insurers. And yeah, big corporations, Wall Street, and the top 1% pay their fair share. God bless her. It is just spectacular. And I believe I mentioned this yesterday. Donald Trump says he's going to do a new tax cut. This is a bribe, right? He's basically saying to the billionaires who own the Republican Party, the Republican Party in the 1980s, because the Supreme Court had legalized it in the mid-1970s, the Republican Party basically put themselves up for sale to the highest bidder. And they were purchased by billionaires like the Koch brothers and the Bradley Foundation and the Joe Coors and others. Richard Mellon Scaife and his buddies. I mean, this is back in the 80s. They got purchased by all these guys after David Koch's unsuccessful run for vice president on the Libertarian ticket in 1980. He just decided, screw that, I'm going to buy a political party, right? And so the Republicans were purchased by these billionaires and by the corporations that made them rich, particularly the corporations that nobody liked, the ones who really needed help, the tobacco corporations, the oil corporations, the coal corporations, the chemical industry, the pesticide industry. They own the Republican Party right now. And they really benefited from Trump's $1 trillion tax cut. And so Trump is now saying, and they're paying him back. I mean, this $1.5 trillion from his tax cut last year just rained down on these people. I mean, it was like manna from heaven. And so, you know, that's kind of faded out. Corporations used $1 trillion to buy back their own stocks, which is what's been driving the stock market up. It's not going up because businesses are developing new products or expanding their product line or anything like that. Stock market's going up because companies are buying back their own stock. Over $1 trillion worth of stock buybacks in the last 2 years. But that's slowed down dramatically now because the tax cut is, wearing off, as it were, for big corporations. I mean, it's still there for billionaires. So now Trump is asking the Republican Party to come up with a new tax cut. It's his way of saying to the billionaires, the big corporations, keep supporting the Republicans, keep supporting me, help me get reelected, and I'll make sure that you're taken care of. I mean, in countries like the Philippines or Hungary or, some of these other places, these oligarchies, essentially, average citizens just expect that the rich own the government and the government does what the rich want. I mean, it's like, okay, yeah, of course. That's how things work. But in the United States, that's not how things are supposed to work. And it's not how things worked in the United States, by and large, up until the 1980s. And since 1981, since Ronald Reagan was sworn into office, this is all we've seen come out of the Republican Party, is corrupt obeisance, if I'm saying and using that word correctly, to morbid wealth. The morbidly rich own the Republican Party. And, and that accounts for this whole partisan divide thing, too.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
People say, why won't the Republicans participate with the Democrats in good legislation? Because they're owned by the billionaires who don't want that legislation. And welcome back. Boy, by the way, it's just an absolutely beautiful, it's cold. It's been below freezing every morning the last 3 mornings, but just a beautiful day here in Portland. I hope it is where you are too. What a fascinating day. Anyhow, Jude in Las Vegas. Hey, Jude, what's on your mind today? Thanks for watching us on YouTube. What's up?
Tom, it's Judd.
Judd, I'm sorry. Oh, you're right. It is Judd. I've
called you before.
Yep.
And it's been a while. And I really hope that everything works out well, and we end up with hopefully Elizabeth Warren is our next president, and but I just wanted to ask you this question because you've said that if it doesn't go well and he ends up getting reelected, it's all over with, the whole 240 years, whatever we have.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you, there was secession talk after he got in from California, and we all know about the crazy Texans that wanted to secede. back a decade or whatever ago. But if it really does happen, I wanted to propose
Hang on
California
a second. If what
now.
really does happen?
If Trump gets reelected and everything goes down the tubes.
Right, and that's kind of essentially the end of democracy in America, right?
Right, that's what I was saying. So what would you think of California now? Not just California. Now stands for Nevada, Oregon, and Washington.
Right.
And we all secede from Trumpistan.
Huh. I don't know if you could pull it off with Nevada, but because, the
That's
Nevada
where I live now. I live in Vegas,
Yeah, but the Nevada power structure are the billionaire oligarchs who own the casinos. And they're totally in with Trump, they own most of the politicians in the state. I realize, you've got a fairly strong Democratic Party there, but I think the power center is with the oligarchs. That's not so much the case in California, Oregon, and Washington. And interesting.
We've got two Democratic senators in Nevada now. We've got a Democratic congressman.
Yeah.
I was disappointed when he didn't, when they were voting on whether to put all their votes towards the winner on the Electoral College and stuff.
Right.
And I forget his name, Steve, the new governor, he declined to do that like other states had.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the fairvote.org thing where this, Is he a Democrat?
The new governor, Steve Sisolak.
Steve Sisolak. I think it takes a vote of the legislature in order to make that happen. So that may be his problem. Are both your houses, the House and Senate, controlled by Democrats, or is one controlled by Republicans?
I honestly don't know that. I know my congressperson is a Democrat, and I believe we have two Democratic senators now with Catherine Cortez Masto and
right. That's at the federal level, but I'm talking about this at the state level. But most of us don't pay much attention to state politics. I couldn't tell you who my state representative is, which I'm embarrassed to say, but and I need to look up. But most people just don't follow state politics.
You and me both.
Yeah, but it would be good to find out. I need to start reading the Oregonian again and paying attention to this. Although they do terrible coverage of the state legislature. But Judd, that's an idea. Time for secession. If Trump gets reelected, I think if Trump gets reelected, you're going to start hearing conversations like you just started, Judd. Thanks a lot for the call. It's great to hear from you. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Anything Goes Friday. So, John in Minneapolis. Hey, John, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, I just wanted to say I wanted to defend my Congressman Ilhan Omar for, just voting present for this bill that recognizes the Armenian genocide. Mm-hmm. Even though I would be for it, I think that, her reasoning is pretty solid, and I think
What was her reasoning?
Well, her reasoning was that she just felt like it was politically motivated, that she wanted to recognize all genocides, and that there were a lot of genocides that have occurred even here in this country. And so she didn't vote against it. She voted for it. But it is so disingenuous for both political parties have never recognized on the 100th anniversary of the Armenian genocide, even though they had the opportunity to do it, and the Armenian community wanted them to recognize the Armenian genocide, and there's a direct connection between that genocide and the Holocaust. Right. They didn't do it because Turkey is an ally, and they refuse to even talk about it in Turkey. Historically, right. They just.
Oh, this has been so political. When I lived in Washington, D.C., John, there was an old bank building, a beautiful old bank building. It might have been called the First Bank of D.C. or something like that. It's on the corner of G, as I recall, G and 14th. And maybe F and 14th, but I'm pretty sure it's G and 14th. And it was abandoned. All 7 years that I lived in D.C., I walked by it every day. and it was just like completely empty. And one day I was talking with an executive of a company that had an office across the street from there, who I had just gotten to know by coincidence. And I pointed to the building. I said, "This is such a beautiful building. I mean, it's got these huge high ceilings on the ground floor. You can see through the windows, Now, although they're all barred up and stuff." And I said, how come somebody hasn't bought that and turned it into something? And he said, somebody did. He said about a decade ago, the Armenians bought it, and the Armenian government, and they wanted to turn it into a museum of the Armenian genocide. And the politicians in D.C., and I don't know if this is the city government or the federal government, I'm assuming the federal government, since they control the district, have not allowed them to do it. They won't grant them the permits. They've blocked them at every step. And so it's just sitting there. It's amazing.
Yeah, but I just wanted to underscore that I think there is a lot of bigotry and a lot of prejudice against Muslims in this country, and particularly a woman, who is in the Congress that wears a hijab.
Oh, she's got a triple whammy. Plus, she's a Democrat.
She's not just interested in the Muslim community, and they're such a small part of this congressional district. She appeals to all of us. And, I think that they want to, just write a narrative that, is opposite to what actually she stands for. So I just wanted to clear that up maybe with some of your listeners, because I don't find her to be, I mean, she's not without fault, of course, but who doesn't?
Right.
And
this was just, John, forgive the interruption, we have 15 seconds. This was just a resolution acknowledging it, right? And then it goes to the Senate where it'll die?
Yeah, probably. And it's just too bad that we cannot accept all race, nationalities within this country, and that we, have this issue.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. And white bigotry and religious bigotry and gender, male bigotry, male supremacy, all those things play into it. John, thank you for the call. Good talking to you. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's coming up on 28 minutes past the hour. It's Anything Goes Friday here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Although Jeff Cohen is going to drop by in our third hour. I'll be right back. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Fred Kaplan's new book, The Bomb: Presidents, Generals, and the Secret History of Nuclear War. This is from the introduction. For 30 years after the Cold War ended, almost no one thought, much less worried, about nuclear war. Now, almost everyone is fearful. But the fear takes the form of a vaguely paralyzed anxiety. Because of the long reprieve from the bomb's shadow, few people know how to grasp its dimensions. They've forgotten, if they ever knew. The holiday from history began on August 8th, 2017, when President Donald Trump, barely 6 months in office, told reporters at his golf resort in Bedminster, New Jersey, that if the North Koreans kept threatening the United States with harsh rhetoric and missile tests, quote, they will be met with fire and fury like the world has never seen, end quote. Even those who didn't remember President Harry Truman's similar description 72 years earlier of the atomic bomb that destroyed Hiroshima, Truman said, a rain of ruin from the air, the like of which has never been seen on this earth. It was clear that in language more bellicose than any president since the end of World War II, Trump was talking about launching nuclear weapons at North Korea. Not if its leader, Kim Jong-un, first attacked the United States, but merely if he developed the ability to do so. Then, 6 months later, Trump signed and released his administration's Nuclear Posture Review, a 74-page document that called for building new types of nuclear weapons and integrating them with the military's conventional war plans. In short, for treating nuclear weapons as normal. The red lights flashed. The alarm bells rang furiously. Yet here is what few recognized. None of these notions were new. The president himself seemed a departure from the norm. His character, erratic, eruptive, thin-skinned, willfully uninformed, a combustive mix for a world leader with his finger on the button. But the button and everything around it were the same. In those decades when most of us chose to forget the bomb, as global tensions calmed and fallout shelters crumbled and we turned our gaze to other problems and pleasures, the nuclear war machine continued to rumble forth in the beyond top secret chambers of the Pentagon, the Strategic Command Headquarters in Omaha, the weapons labs in various parts of the country, and the think tanks whose denizens never stopped thinking about the unthinkable. They all kept at their singular task, wrestling with the dilemmas posed by the bomb's existence. How to deter nuclear war, how to fight a nuclear war if it cannot be deterred, how to win it if such a thing is even possible. This is the nature of the nuclear era, and the era never drifted into suspension, even if our attention did. Trump snapped us out of our slumber, reminded those of us who were old enough to know, and informed those who weren't that the bomb is still here. In public over the years, officers and officials have described America's nuclear policy as a second strike deterrence. If an enemy strikes us with nuclear weapons, we will retaliate in kind. This retaliatory power is what deters the enemy from attacking us. In reality, though, American policy has always been to strike first preemptively, or in response to a conventional invasion of Allied territory, or to a biological or large-scale cyber attack. In any case, not just as an answer to nuclear attack. All of these options envision firing nuclear weapons at military targets for military ends. They envision the bomb as a weapon of war writ large. This vision has been enshrined in the American military's doctrines, drills, and exercises from the onset of the nuclear era through all its phases. Most presidents have been skeptical of this vision, morally, strategically, practically, but none of them have rejected it. Some have threatened to launch nuclear weapons first as a way of settling a crisis. The few who considered adopting a no first use policy, in the end, decided against it. There are rationales for these doctrines, drills, and exercises, and for the retention of the first use option. They are driven by policies, personalities, and bureaucratic rivalries, but also by a logic which, once its premises are accepted, hurls its adherents and the rest of us into a rabbit hole of increasingly bizarre scenarios that seem increasingly, if strangely, rational the deeper they're probed. Understanding the nuclear era, the era of our lifetime, means understanding the rabbit hole, who dug it, and how we got stuck inside. It means tracing the maze of its tunnels, which is to say the arc of its history. A story enmeshed in secrecy, some of it still secret, much of it now illuminated by declassified documents and interviews with key actors, though never fully told. How did we get to this second coming of nuclear panic? How did we wind up with thousands of nuclear weapons, far more than any war aims could justify? What propelled the nuclear arms race during the decades-long Cold War? And what happened to the weapons and their guardians after the Cold War ended? And how and why did any of this persist? Chapter 1, Killing a Nation. 10. The book Fred Kaplan's The Bomb. Welcome back. Marcy Wheeler writing over at emptywheel.net. This is interesting. She says, perhaps the most interesting aspect of the debate is that the Republican closing argument came from Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy. Kevin McCarthy came out yesterday and did a little press conference, and he quoted Alexander Hamilton. And she points out McCarthy received money both personally and in the guise of his Protect the House PAC, he owns a super PAC, from Igor and Lev, Igor Fruman and Lev Parnas, the grifters at the core of the influence operation that led to Trump's quid pro quo conversation with President Zelensky. He also keynoted an event that he, being Kevin McCarthy, he keynoted an event with these two grifters. While he said that he'd donate the money to charity, though he has not done so yet, as far as I know, there's no way to unring the bell of their support. He became majority leader with the support of men who have since been indicted for that support. And that's the face of the guy leading the impeachment effort. Pretty amazing. Oh, and ISIS has named a new leader. al-Baghdadi, of course, was their 6th leader. They now have a 7th. And let's see here. Where did his name go? It's buried. Oh, here it is. Abu al-Hassan al-Muhajir. So, oh, no, wait a minute. He's the former spokesman who was also killed. So here, who's the new guy? Oh, Mr. al-Quraishi. Al-Quraishi is the new leader of ISIS. So, you know, sort of like cockroaches. Anyhow, let's pick up your phone calls here. Paul in Flossmoor, Illinois. Do I have it right, Paul?
It's Pat in Flossmoor, Illinois.
Oh, Pat. Boy, that's the second time today. I got to clean my glasses. I'm sorry, Pat.
Yes, I was calling. I'm a retired African-American librarian, and I was calling because of my concern about public education. I think it's in grave danger. There's a large number of emotionally disturbed children being taken out of self-contained special education classrooms and being placed in, quote, regular classrooms or mainstreamed. The time and energy these classroom teachers must devote to these children literally sucks the air out of a class period. And this is not just an issue for low-income or inner-city schools. I have talked to teachers all over the country in middle class as well as upper income who complain about this policy from the federal government. And the thing is, they say, oh, well, you have an aide, so that should be fine. And it's not. These children need to be returned to their self-contained classrooms to benefit themselves as well as their peers.
Yeah.
And the fallout from this is we're losing classroom teachers. They're averaging 5 years, and they're gone.
Pat, is this because Title I requires that any child who has been coded with special needs actually has to have those needs met by law, and that can be expensive for school districts? And so rather than meeting their needs, they're basically uncoding the kids and throwing them back into classrooms?
Absolutely. It's a lot cheaper to have a self-contained classroom has a limit on the number of kids. You
Right.
can have no more than 8 and a special education trained teacher, and they must have an aide. And
Right.
when you throw them in a regular classroom, all bets drop.
Yeah.
However many you want. Yeah,
Yeah.
whatever you want.
Amazing.
Chicago teachers just settled a strike, and they had a man on TV almost in tears. They gave him a split class, first and second grade. He said half of his kids, 11 of them, were special needs. He had one aide. He had a fire drill, and he was afraid he couldn't get everybody out the room.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, this is, you know, basically abusing the system, but, you know, in defense of the school systems, which is sometimes, you know, difficult to do, but in defense of the school systems, they're badly underfunded. You know, particularly the school systems in places where the property taxes are the principal source of funding and property values are not that high, particularly poorer communities. And whether it's poor rural communities or whether it's poor inner city communities, this problem is a very, very real problem. And this is not a bug. This is a feature. This was built into the system back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, when public school systems were going nationwide. Horace Mann started this thing in the 1880s. And by the 1920s, basically, you know, pretty much every community in America had public schools. But they wanted to make sure that the wealthy communities could have good schools and the poor, and that they wouldn't have to pay for schools in the poor communities. And so they basically, you know, constructed it so that schools are paid for principally by property taxes, and therefore the quality of a school, from the physical plant to the pay of the teachers, you know, not necessarily the quality of the teachers themselves, but certainly the number of the teachers, and therefore the quality of education, largely becomes a function of the wealth of the community, and that's a tragedy. And that gets compounded by the fact that children who come from poor families, rural or inner city, white, black, whatever it may be, children who come from poorer families are more likely to, statistically more likely to need a little extra help in school, particularly in the first 5 years. And so you collide those two things and you have a crisis. Am I accurately describing this, Pat?
Partially, but here in Illinois, I have a friend that works in Harvey, Illinois, low-income, minority district. They had their special ed children in self-contained classrooms. The state came in and said, you must mainstream these kids.
Oh, really?
Yes. And they fought it, they ignored them and blew them off. And now the teachers there are just in tears. They said, we can't get anything done.
Amazing.
Because, of course, we have a large number of
right, because the state doesn't want to have to pay for these kids either. Is that what it is?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Jeez. Okay, yeah, it's been 20 years since I was in the education business, as it were. Louise and I used to run a private school in New Hampshire, or we ran an institution that had a private school, a Hunter school. And I was on the board for 30 years. But we were taking kids out of the public school system that no public school could deal with. So I only had, passing familiarity with the insides of the public schools, although most of the teachers we hired had come out of public schools, and I would hear these horror stories. Thank you for informing me, Pat. I really appreciate it. Thank you for the call.
So, if that's happening in your community, get on the phone to your legislator and say, we want to end to it. And once again, it's not just poor communities. Our middle-class people and others are complaining just as violently about it.
Okay, great. Pat, thank you for the information. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Good talking with you.
Day.
Thank you. Martha in Port Charlotte, Florida. Hey, Martha, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I was wondering, do you know the 3 Republicans and the 1 Democrat that did not vote in the impeachment inquiry?
No, I don't have that list. I'm sorry. I had yesterday. I had the list of the 2 Democrats who voted with the Republicans, but I threw it away after the show.
That.
Yeah, but so there were people who didn't show up for the vote. I'm guessing the people who didn't show up for the vote probably had a reasonable explanation. Although who knows? I mean, but I'll have to keep an eye out for that, Martha. And when I find it, I'll say it on the air. Okay.
Sure. And the other thing is,
and by the way, Martha, if you find it, tweet it to me, and I'll say it on the air. Back to you. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. Wait, I got another question or a suggestion. How about if we could do some type of fact-checking on Trump's lies and his crazy tweets and everything that could run at the bottom of your show constantly, the 12,000, over 12,000 lies.
Oh, you're watching us on TV. You want to crawl. It's called a crawl. The little, the little news
just a
ticker thing.
Constant runner of what he's costing us taxpayers. All the wonderful things that he does for our country that are.
Yeah, wouldn't that be a hoot? We don't have the
people are reminded.
Yeah, we don't have the frankly financial resources to do that here right now.
Nowhere on free speech, nowhere on any station of free speech.
Yeah, no. Well, it would have to be generated here. That's something. Although that's something the Free Speech TV could probably insert on all of their shows. But you'd have to take that up with Free Speech TV. But it's an interesting idea. Martha, I got to move along. But thank you for the call. Guevara in Los Angeles, listening on KPFK. Am I saying your name right?
Yeah, you nailed it. Thank you, Tom.
Hey, what's up?
I just wanted to address a previous caller's comments about Ilhan Omar's vote on the Armenian genocide. I think doesn't pay attention to the fact that in the same day, she also voted against sanctions against Turkey. As a Kurdish American, I can't express this enough. She's not doing any justice to anyone here on those issues. Not only is it not recognizing a 100-year-old plus genocide, but it's also supporting a current genocide carried out by Turkey.
Right.
As an American, there's this current feeling that, America's up for sale. And it feels like she's just joined in those ranks because those votes came in line with her support and lobbying from like Turkish groups.
Yeah. Kavera, I would encourage you to call her
why
office and ask, what's the deal here on this vote? I heard the number is 202-225-3121. That gets you to the main switchboard for Congress, and you can simply ask for Representative Omar Ilhan's office, and they'll connect you.
Right, definitely.
So,
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then even her comments on the issue was almost verbatim a copy of what the Turkish consulate or Turkish embassy has put out here. It's one thing if you stay silent on one of the votes, which is, okay, obviously egregious if she would have voted against it, which is why I think she stays silent on it. But when 300,000 people are displaced right now, okay, I don't offer a military option. I don't think Americans should die for this. However, she couldn't even stand to at least vote, for the sanctions against Erdogan and his ethnic cleansing operation.
Well,
it really makes us complicit, and it's a disservice to even Muslims in America.
I get it. I can't say that that's actually what happened. It's just what you just said happened.
To Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
So again, just because a caller calls into a talk show and says something doesn't mean it's so. Although 95% of the time it is. We'll look into it. We'll be back. And welcome back. Jake in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania. Hey, Jake, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. A couple weeks ago, I think it was, you were talking about how you'd read a book about the collapse of the Roman Empire. Am I remembering that right?
Yes. I have it at home.
Well, I've studied the Roman Empire quite a bit, and I was interested in what you'd think about this. So one of the ways that Julius Caesar came to power and stayed in power was by appealing to what the common people, the plebeians in ancient Rome, wanted. They wanted land reform, they wanted economic reform, and most importantly, they wanted an end to the constant civil wars that were happening in Rome at the time between these powerful oligarchs. So I was wondering, what do you think if somebody came to power in the United States and said, we're going to do Medicare for all, we're going to get out of all these crazy wars, we're going to do fair trade deals with all the other countries, just do rational reform in this country, but in exchange, that person, that political figure becomes a dictator. What do you think about that?
It's a tough one. I mean, this is what Hitler did. When Hitler came to power, the economy of Germany was in shambles, in part because of World War I, in part because of the Great Depression, and in part because the Treaty of Versailles had imposed these punishing reparations payments on Germany for rebuilding Belgium and Holland and the other countries that they'd invaded. And so Hitler did a couple of things. The main one was building the Autobahn, starting the production of the Volkswagen. He built a German car industry from scratch, essentially, and he built this interstate highway system, and then he just really super juiced the military-industrial complex of Germany, the defense industry, and the result of and he gave everybody health care. I mean, everybody already had health care because Germany had started the single-payer health care system back in the 1880s, but Hitler strengthened that, and that's why by 1936, he was on the cover of Time magazine. He was as one of the most popular politicians in the world. And he was certainly the most popular politician in German history at that point in time. And which is why in 37, he felt safe to do the Anschluss, to invade, to take a piece of what was it, Austria? And then, in late 1937 to invade Poland. So, it's not inconceivable, Jake. It would. The one thing that I think would prevent it is, well, the two things that I think would prevent it would be that we've seen that movie before now, and I mean that's kind of what Donald Trump was promising. You'll recall when he was running for president, he said, "I'm going to give everybody in America health care. It's going to be better than Obamacare, and it's going to cost less." Well, that's what Elizabeth Warren just proposed. He didn't say how he was going to do it, but he said everybody's going to get health care. He said everybody's going to have a job. We're going to strengthen the social safety net. Remember that time during the debate, he stood up on the stage and he said, every one of these Republicans up here wants to cut Medicare and Social Security. I'm going to preserve it and strengthen it. I'm the only one who will say that.
I do remember.
That was the moment, I think, when a lot of people in the middle just said, hey, I'm voting for Donald Trump. So, I could see a right-wing populist coming to power on those issues. Whether they could execute or not is difficult because the Republican Party is so owned by these big industries. But it's an interesting thought experiment. Jake, thanks for the call. Yeah. It's a fascinating thought experiment, in fact. It's 10 minutes before the hour. We'll be back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you and Maxine in Cleveland, Mississippi. Hey, Maxine, what's on your mind today?
Hello, Mr. Thom. I would like to ask a question about my private insurance. I have Medicare, but I have Blue Cross Blue Shield. I'm retired, but I kept my state insurance, and I've been retired like 6 years. It went up again. It's twice it went up. And I called them. I contacted them, asked them why my insurance keep going up, and they said that's for the offset the high cost of health care. And I just couldn't quite understand that. And I already pay a high premium, and I very seldom use the Blue Cross Blue Shield because I'm on Medicare.
So let me understand this. You're over 65, Maxine?
Yes, I'm 66.
Okay. And you have Medicare Part A and B. You don't have a Medicare Advantage plan. You've got regular Medicare A and B?
No, I don't have the Advantage plan. I just have original Medicare.
Right. Medicare A and B, right? And presumably D.
Yes.
Okay. So have you bought a Medigap?
It's the drug. I got D too.
Yeah. Okay. So have you bought a Medigap plan that fills in that 20% hole in Medicare Part B?
No.
Okay.
I just kept my private insurance,
right.
Blue Cross Blue
So,
Shield.
I can't really specifically advise you. I'm not a Medicare advisor, and I'm certainly not, I don't have the level of expertise but there is a group in your state that's paid for by the state. We had the caller last week that was talking about it, and my apologies, I don't know what it would be called in Mississippi. But if you call, you may have to do some Googling, but it seems to me that the best thing to do would be to dump the private health insurance altogether and get a Medigap plan and that fills in the hole for Medicare, and which is typically not that expensive. They're between $150 and $300 a month, depending on the plan that you get and what your income is, and you just don't need the Blue Cross Blue Shield anymore. But don't take my word for it. Fact check this and find out. But generally speaking, when people turn 65 and they go on Medicare, they can just abandon their private health insurance. I did. Our little company provides health insurance to all of our employees. And when I turned 65, I redirected those funds from Medicare to my Medigap plan, from our private health insurance, that Sean and Nate have because they're young'uns, onto my plan. So that's what I would do, Maxine. But double check me, right? Double check it, but don't double check it with your Blue Cross Blue Shield people. They're going to try and get you to keep that policy. Double check it with somebody who understands Medicare. Maxine, thank you for the call. Susan in how do you say that town, Susan, in Florida? Alachua? I'm not hearing from Susan. Okay, I'm going to put Susan on hold. She's on line 5, Joyce, if you want to find out what's going on. Heather in Lansing, Michigan. Hey, Heather, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I just wanted to call. I am addressing the previous caller that talked about the special ed kids in the general ed population. Mm-hmm. And I know I'm the parent of a couple of Aspies, and I understand the challenge and how it does suck the air right out of the room sometimes. But a lot of these kids need to be in the general population. Otherwise, they're going to shut down. If you put high-functioning Aspies in a room with kids who just aren't at that level, they sink to the level of the room instead of rising.
You're right.
And developing coping.
Well, what you're speaking to, Heather, I get the mainstreaming thing, and I'm supportive of mainstreaming. In fact, when we ran the Hunter School, one of our goals was to get our kids back into public schools and into normal classrooms. We were trying to get them all to a point where they could do that, and also that special ed tends to basically be an educational ghetto. It's a pit
it's
into
kind
which
of a daycare.
Yeah, all kinds of kids are poured. And, some of them are profoundly what used to be called mentally retarded, developmentally delayed, fetal alcohol syndrome kids who, 10 years old and they literally can't read and probably never will at a high level of functioning. And then on the other hand, you get kids who are on the autistic spectrum, particularly Aspies, who are really super bright and literally could be doing college.
My third graders were reading at a 10th grade level.
Right,
and they could be
doing college level work in the 5th grade, and I'm a little bit in that direction myself, and so I understand that really well.
Me too.
And they get bored in a regular classroom, and they get profoundly bored and driven nuts in these special ed classrooms. What I think we need to do, Heather, back in the day when I was a kid, when I was in 2nd grade, which would have been 1957, as I recall, Sputnik went up, and Dwight Eisenhower freaked out. And he was the president, and he said, "Oh my God, look at this! The Russians just, I remember the little satellite going over our house, pinging. I listened to it on my shortwave radio." And Dwight Eisenhower said, "We've got to educate a generation of scientists." And in my little elementary school in Lansing, in suburban Lansing, they came in and they did basically IQ tests for all these kids, and they pulled 2 kids out of my class, me and my friend Terry, and put us into a special ed class for gifted kids. And Terry and I, over the course of the next couple of years in that elementary school, were all the way up to the level of doing college-level work by the time we had graduated 6th grade. Because of that,
that was me in the 7th grade.
Yeah, because of that program for gifted kids. That program ended when the Vietnam War started. And I think we need to bring back education for gifted kids, which would include probably a lot of Aspies.
For education. Funding for education is the root of the problem, I think.
Absolutely. Well, that's the thing. That program for gifted kids that helped me, that helped Terry, that helped a whole generation of kids who grew up to become scientists. This was in the 50s, right? It ended in the mid-60s. That program needs to be brought back. We need to invest in our gifted children. We absolutely do. Heather, thank you very much for the call. Spot on.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
We say fight back!
Welcome to the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Settlers, the Mythology of the White Proletariat, the True Story of the White Nation by J. Sakai, published by Morningstar Press in 1989. This is from Chapter 2, The Foundations of Settler Life. The life of European settlers and the class structure of their society was abnormal because it was dependent upon a foundation of conquest, genocide, and enslavement. The myth of the self-sufficient white settler family clearing the wilderness and supporting themselves through their own initiative and hard labor is a propaganda fabrication. It is the absolute characteristic of settler society to be parasitic, dependent upon the super-exploitation of oppressed peoples for its style of life. Never has Euro-American society completely supported itself.
This is the decisive factor in the consciousness of all classes and strata of white society from 1600 to now. Settler society was raised up above the level of backward old Europe by a foundation of conquest. This conquest was a miracle drug for a Europe convulsed with the reaction of decaying feudalism and deadly capitalism. Shot into the veins of the Spanish feudal nation, for instance, the miracle drug of the New World conquest gave Spain the momentary power to overrun North Africa, Holland, and Italy before her historical incident waned. Like many such fixes for Euro-Americans, this conquest was addicting. It was habit-forming and rapidly indispensable, not only culturally, but in the mechanism of an oppressor society whose lifeblood was new conquest. We'll examine this later in the relationship of settlerism to imperialism. For now, it's enough to see that this conquest is a material act of great magnitude, an economic and social event as important as the emergence of the factory system or the exploitation of petroleum in the Middle East. We stress the obvious here because the Euro-American settlers have always made light of their invasion and occupation, although the conquered territory is the precondition for their whole society. Traditionally, European settler societies throw off the propaganda smoke screens that they didn't really conquer and dispossess other nations. They claim with false modesty that they merely moved into vacant territory. So the early English settlers depicted America as empty, a howling wilderness, unsettled, sparsely populated, just waiting with a vacant sign on the door for the first lucky civilization to walk in and claim it. Theodore Roosevelt wrote defensively in 1900, quote, "The settler and pioneer have at bottom had justice on their side. This great continent could not have been kept as nothing but a game preserve for squalid savages," end of quote. It is telling that this lie is precisely the same lie put forward by white Afrikaner settlers who claim that South Africa was literally totally uninhabited by any Africans when they arrived from Europe. To universal derision, these European settlers claim to be the only rightful historic inhabitants of South Africa. Or we can hear similar defenses put forward by the European settlers of Israel, who claim that much of the Palestinian land and buildings they occupy are rightfully theirs, since the Arabs had allegedly decided to voluntarily abandon it all during the 1948-49 war. Are these kinds of tales any less preposterous than those put forward by Euro-American settlers? America was spacious and sparsely populated only because the European invaders destroyed whole civilizations and killed off millions of Native Americans to get the land and profits they wanted. We all know that when the English arrived at Virginia, for example, they encountered an urban, village-dwelling society far more skilled than they were in the arts of medicine, agriculture, fishing, and government. This civilization was reflected in a chain of 300 Indian nations and peoples stretching from the Arctic Circle to the tip of South America, many of whom had highly developed societies. There was, in fact, a greater population in these Indian nations in 1492 than in all of Western Europe. Recent scholarly estimates indicate that at the time of Columbus, there were 100 million Indians in the hemisphere, 10 million in North America, 25 million in Central Mexico, and an additional 65 million elsewhere in Central and South America. These numbers have long been concealed since they give rise to the logical question of what happened to this great mass of people. The European invaders, Spanish, Dutch, English, Portuguese, and French, simply killed off millions and millions to safeguard their conquest of the land and provide the disposable slave labor they needed to launch their new world. Conservative Western historical estimates show that the Spanish reduced, in quotes, the Indian population of their colonies from some 50 million to only 4 million by the end of the 17th century. And from the 10 million Indians who once inhabited North America, after 4 centuries of settler invasion and rule, there were in 1900 perhaps 200,000 to 300,000 surviving descendants in the United States. This was the very substantial down payment towards the continuing blood price that third world nations have to pay to sustain the Euro-American way of life. So when we hear that the settlers pushed out the Indians or forced the Indians to leave their traditional hunting grounds, we know that these are just code phrases to refer politely to the most barbaric genocide imaginable. It could well be the greatest crime in all of human history. Only here, the Adolf Eichmanns and Heinrich Himmlers had names like Benjamin Franklin and Andrew Jackson. The point is that genocide was not an accident, not an excess, not the unintended side effect of virile European growth. Genocide was the necessary and deliberate act of the capitalists and their settler shock troops. the book Settlers.
Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
2015. Seth Abramson.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. It's Anything Goes Friday. A caller in the previous hour had asked who did not show up for the House impeachment vote. And I said, I'm sorry, I don't know right off the top of my head. Now, Sean tracked it down. Here it is. It was Jody Hice, Republican from Georgia's 10th District, John Rose, Republican from Tennessee's 6th District, William Timmons, Republican from South Carolina's 4th District, and Donald McEachin, a Democrat from Virginia's 4th District. And let me just add the caveat that, pretty much every vote, there are a few people who don't show up. They have family events, they have previous commitments, they're sick. You've got, a whole bunch of people. You've got pushing a little over 400 people, and I think it's 435 people. And, odds are when you have that many people that somebody's got the flu, right? So it doesn't mean that those people are necessarily, malefactors. but anyway, somebody asked, and so we looked it up, and there it is. Fred Flintstone just got an email from Donald Trump. At the very top, it says impeachment resolution vote results. Radical Republicans, 231. This is on the resolution, yay, 2 nay. Radical Democrats, 231 to 2, and 2 saying no. And Republicans, 0 yes, 194 no. Now, what this says to me is that the Republican Party is wholly owned by the billionaire class, and that Donald Trump is giving them everything they want. And they don't care if he's a racist, a misogynist, an orange buffoon. They just want their damn tax cuts and their deregulation. And they want to be able to buy public lands for a penny, and they want to be able to keep on polluting. And Donald Trump is doing, and they don't want their taxes audited. So please, cut the funding for the IRS. Donald Trump has done all those things for them, and in fact, he's even proposing a new tax cut for them. But in any case, the email says, Fred, Democrats know I've done nothing wrong, but they are trying to take us down. That's why 231 Democrats voted to continue this hoax, capital H, and formalize the impeachment probe, capital P. This impeachment nonsense is just a continuation of the witch hunt hoax, which has been going on since before I even got elected. They hate me, Fred, and most of all, they hate you, Fred. Now, this is really interesting. Keep in mind, Donald Trump lost the popular election by 3 million votes. 3 million more people voted for Hillary Clinton than for Donald Trump in the election of 2016. But Donald Trump goes on, they hate the idea of you being in charge of our country. They want to erase your vote like it never existed. They want to erase, the word erase is in all caps. They want to erase your voice, and they want to erase your future. Now, this is how dictators and strongmen talk. This is not how politicians in America talk. This is really dangerous rhetoric. This is telling average voters who have bought into the Trump thing
that the Democrats hate them and that the Democrats are trying to erase them. This is how Hitler talked about Jews in the 1930s and gypsies. This is how Orban talks about Jews and George Soros right now in Hungary. This is how Duterte talked about the opposition political parties. They hate the idea of you being in charge of our country. They want to erase your vote like it never existed. They want to erase your voice, and they want to erase your future. And then he goes on, today is the last day of the month, and with only 3 hours left before the deadline, we're still critically short of our goal. Previously, a group of donors had agreed to triple match all contributions, but with this impeachment news, I've authorized something we've never done before. All donations made before midnight tonight will be instantly 5 times matched. Note, if you've saved your payment information, your donation will go through immediately. Contribute $42 before midnight tonight, and your contribution will be 5 times matched. And then it's got my email address and says Fred Flintstone, account number, deadline, midnight tonight, 5-time match, not used. It's a fundraising pitch, but this is also the kind of stuff that creates hatred and political violence. I mean, this is actually dangerous stuff. It's just incredible, just incredible. Anyhow, as I said, it's Anything Goes Friday, so picking up your phone calls. Tim in Hendersonville, North Carolina. Hey, Tim, what's on your mind today?
Well, I kind of wanted to further the conversation that you were having regarding special needs.
Okay, Tim, if I could pause you for just a second and let me just fill in the blanks for people who might have just tuned in. We had a caller in the previous hour who called and said she's the mother of 2 Aspie kids. Kids with Asperger's are typically super, super bright, but, they may have, social skill deficiencies or sometimes kind of Tourette-like things and stuff like that. But typically they're super bright, but it's it's on the autistic spectrum. It's considered a disability. And her kids got dumped into a special ed class with a bunch of kids who literally could not read. And she was concerned about that, and she wanted her kids mainstreamed. And then later we had a caller who was saying, well, mainstreaming is a good thing. You want, and what I had said was, the schools are doing this because they don't want to pay. No, actually, it started with a caller saying that special ed kids are getting dumped into the public schools or into the mainstream classrooms, and it's sucking up all the air in the room. That was the first caller. Then the second caller said, but wait a minute, what about my kids? They're being dumped in special ed, and it's become kind of a ghetto. And I pointed out that when I was in second grade back in 1957, and Sputnik went up, Eisenhower went nuts. I might be a year off on the year there. You'd have to look when Sputnik went up. But Eisenhower went nuts, and the federal government started this program to fund programs for gifted kids. And my friend Terry and I were the 2 kids who got pulled out of our class in second grade, and super, we could learn at our own rate. We had essentially a tutor along with a few other kids from the school. And by the time we graduated from the 6th grade, we were doing college-level work. And in fact, I got a summer scholarship to MSU when I was 14 years old as a result of that. So that was my story. So now to your story, and I was calling for special ed programs for gifted kids to be brought back, because that program that Eisenhower started went away with the Vietnam War in the 1960s. Now to you, Tim.
Well, I think all kids are gifted. And let me preface this by saying that, my heroes were the kids with disabilities that I grew up with. My brother was born with cerebral palsy. I was born in 1961. And back then, before mainstream special ed kids were mainstreamed, we had very, very good private schools for a lot of the kids with special needs or disabilities. The problem is they weren't compartmentalized properly. There was kids in there that should have been mainstreamed. But Joe had a great education. Betcher School in Denver, Colorado, BOETTCHER, was funded by some wealthy patrons, and the teachers were paid very well. And this was just a school for special needs kids. And let me just say here and now that he had, and I've been a guest arts instructor and a public school substitute instructor for a long time as well, so I know how kids are mainstreamed today. And I do have a son with Asperger's as well. But Joe's education growing up back in the 60s was much, much better.
This is your cerebral palsy brother.
My brother is sitting right here. We listen to you every day.
Yep.
And he's sitting here right here. And Joe's got a brilliant mind. Problem is his motor skills, and you wouldn't understand him to listen to him speak. And of course, he's in a wheelchair 24/7.
Right.
But Joe's a Trekkie and a big-time, thinker, and
right.
He's got a...
Yeah, cerebral palsy does not impair your intellect.
No. But the problem is, see, they were lumped together with kids that had severe retardation and many other things, but they were all put into a special needs school. But the kids had art, they had drama, they had music, they had the plays, they went on field trips.
Wow.
The whole community gathered around these kids. These kids today are locked in the basement of a public school in 1 or 2 rooms, and they're given tutors, and they have special ed teachers that fight like hell to try to give them some sense of personal value, personal stimulation. And the only time they're active with the rest of the school is during lunch.
Yeah.
That's it. And that's what they call mainstreaming today. Now, I don't know if this is a result of Title I. I don't know if this is a result, you can correlate this back to when Reagan started deinstitutionalizing people that had mental needs in this country.
Yeah.
When the institutions all
although that's not Title I. I mean, Title I came out of the Great Society, as I recall. And Title I basically says that if a child has been coded as special needs, the school, regardless of the cost, has to provide them with what they need.
But with all these great corporations, with all this incredible wealth, why we can't go back to funding special needs schools and let these kids get a really good education and a good creative minds need creative outlets.
I agree, Tim. I think that, the way that Elizabeth Warren is coming along and saying, let's blow the whole system up, this whole public health insurance scam that has evolved since the 1930s, really, and 1940s. Actually, it really took deep root in the late 40s, early 50s as the union movement was growing, and the unions were bringing in health insurance as a way to compete, or the companies rather were bringing in health insurance as a way to compete, and unions were using it as something to fight for. Let's blow the whole thing up and replace it with a nationwide system that really works for everybody, but doesn't work for the corporations. We've got a system now where, some of our special needs schools. I mentioned to the last caller that, Louise and I started this thing called the Hutter School in New Hampshire. It closed a couple of years ago, but for almost 30 years, maybe a full 30 years, it operated and served severely. Kids with ADHD that were on the severe end of the spectrum, and we were taking basically Title I kids. Public schools were paying us to educate these kids, with the goal of mainstreaming them back into the schools. But when I looked around at the landscape of my essentially competitors, probably 2/3 of them were private for-profit corporations. And
that's a problem today.
Yeah, and I was not impressed by. There was one that was really well run, but they charged a fortune. I mean, they were charging like $65,000 a year for tuition. But the rest of them were basically just people trying to cash in on Title I requirements. Tim,
let me say one other thing real quick. Joe never paid a dime. We grew up in the housing projects. Joe never paid a dime.
That's great.
All done.
See, we need to do that, and we need to do it for our entire nation. And we need to seriously rethink how we do education. Tim, thank you for the call.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's 18 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls on Anything Goes Friday right after this. And welcome back. Brett in Birdsboro, Pennsylvania. Hey, Brett, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. I wanted to discuss the issue of the infighting within the Democratic Party and how progressives like you and myself can basically educate the neoliberals that, the policies of Bill Clinton-esque policies led to Trump, and how the way to beat Trump is to back progressives like Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren.
I am in agreement with your premise. And by the way, let me point out this new New York Times poll. It's right on the front page of their website.
if you take Warren, 22%, Sanders, 19%, the two of them is 41%, and you add Andrew Yang, because I think he's pulling from Sanders more than anybody else, so that takes it to 43%. So 43% of the total Democratic vote right now is with the progressive wing. And then you add up Buttigieg at 18%, Biden at 17%, Klobuchar at 4%, and Harris at 3%. That adds up to 41%. So right now, the three progressives are polling higher than the four so-called moderates. But anyhow, to you. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, you know, that also doesn't take into account the large appeal Bernie Sanders has among independents as well. And I just want to point out, you know, people like Biden, they expect, I'm in my early 30s, like young adults, where a lot of us are progressive. Biden straight up says how he has no empathy for us and what we went through during the Great Recession and how our careers are stifled. So how is that a winning strategy to get the Democratic base out? And how would his campaign running on platitudes and neoliberalisms end up any different than Hillary's? Or personally, I see it being 2004 all over again.
Yeah, John Kerry. And you know, and John Kerry, I mean, by the way, John Kerry was a decorated war veteran, and the principal argument against him by the Republicans was a lie, you know, that was promoted by Jerome Corsi, that, and remember all the Republican congressmen wearing Band-Aids with a Purple Heart on them? Like, you know, oh, he just had a little nick and he got a Purple Heart, ridiculing John Kerry's service record. The Republicans will do anything, Brett, whether it's a neoliberal like John Kerry or you know, Joe Biden, or whether it's a progressive like Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders. They are going to come on the attack viciously. And for some reason, Democrats think that a corporate-friendly neoliberal candidate, you know, a Biden or a Klobuchar or a Buttigieg, will be more immune or less vulnerable to attacks by Republicans than a genuine progressive like Warren or Sanders. And I think that's complete BS.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. I mean, I think this idea that we need a moderate is outdated ideology from the 1990s when establishment centrism was popular and the DLC basically controlled the Democratic Party. But,
that's right.
You know, I'm from the Rust Belt, and I don't think the establishment Democrats take into account two things: that since the 1990s, we have two new generations who are now voting age who weren't in the 90s that they seem to not care about. And I don't see the Rust Belt, which is crucial for any Democrat to win, voting for someone like Biden who voted for NAFTA.
Right, and look at how Bernie Sanders basically wiped out Hillary Clinton in Michigan, you know, for those reasons in the primary. So yeah, I'm completely with you, but you know, the battle is going to continue. It's just going to keep on going because, well, you know, because of money in politics, frankly. Brett, thank you for the call, and thank you for watching us on YouTube. We'll be right back. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and it's Anything Goes Friday, as previously mentioned. So Jill in Princeton, Minnesota. Hey, Jill, what's up?
Well, hi, Tom. I listen to the people that reach out to you sincerely. They're hurting, and I listen to very intellectuals, and I really think that impeachment procedures came to fruition because of people speaking to their representatives and making a voice. I think that democracy and our Constitution must be upheld. And because our morals and our ethics of our republic are clear, that no person is above the law.
That's the theory. It's not the Office of Legal Counsel's opinion over at the Justice Department, but that's the theory.
However, I think that this divisive thing that whoever wants to believe that our country is so divided, I really don't think we are as divided as whomever media, the owners of the world want us to think.
Yeah.
I think that we have a whole bunch of good men.
And women. I think that
women, and I'd like to acknowledge them.
Yeah. I think a lot of that
song, and you can
Jill, a lot of
off.
that. Yeah, I get it. In my opinion, for what it's worth, a lot of that division is coming about from money. You know, you have Republican politicians who are being well paid by the fossil fuel industry, by the tech industry, by the insurance industry, by the hospital industry, by the chemical industry, by the pharmaceutical industry, the big bank industry, the insurance industry. They're getting piles and piles of money from these industries. And you've got a few Democrats who are taking a lot of money from those industries as well. And so they're going to lock into positions regardless of what the public says or wants. And that creates the appearance of radical partisanship. It makes it look like there are some people who are just absolutely unwilling to budge because of their party affiliation or their ideology. And frankly, I don't think it has anything to do with either. I think it has to do with who is paying their checks. Like Kevin McCarthy. I'll get into that. I'll tell you about Kevin McCarthy right after the break. It's crazy what this guy did. We'll be
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Anything Goes Friday on the Thom Hartmann Program, although in the middle of the third hour of our show, Jeff Cohen is going to drop by. Take care. Book Club today, we're reading from Ralph Nader's new book, How the Rats Reformed the Congress, a fable. It's fiction. Chapter 1, Invader. It was one of those uncomfortable morning strategy sessions with his senior staff. For House Speaker Reginald Blamer, the discomfort was in having to figure ways to continue blocking a long overdue raise in the federal minimum wage for many millions of low-income workers when he knew in his gut it was not the right thing to do. We're in the crosshairs, he would say, starting such congressional meetings in his spacious office. Not that his anxiety would cause him to renege on the implicit promise he had made to the big boys to stop the move in Congress to raise the minimum. But there was still background anxiety. After all, politicians are only human, and like many, Speaker Blamer came from a large family that had lived through tightened circumstances. His father was a tavern keeper and his mother a seamstress. Deep anxiety, however, did have one inherent comfort at such morning gatherings. It tended to work in mysterious ways to overcome his morning constipation, the constant bane of the Speaker's existence. Holding down 30 million workers, including among them many conservative voters who, when adjusted for inflation, were making less today than workers in 1968, bothered the very private, self-censored, psychosomatic recesses of the Speaker's conscience. And so, not surprisingly, Speaker Blamer felt the onset of a solid bowel movement. He excused himself and repaired to his large private bathroom. As he sat down in the broad porcelain toilet, he felt that the expected discharge would be ample and prompt. No straining today. After quick breaks of wind, the Speaker heard
a sound inside the toilet, but it wasn't from his bowels. Lifting himself up a bit, he looked down and saw the head of a mostly submerged black rat closely eyeing his bottom. Yow, 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 bellowed the speaker as he straightened up and slammed the cover down. Alarmed, the staff rushed to the bathroom door to respectfully call, "Speaker Blamer, are you all right? Do you need help?" They dared not open the door. The speaker did not tolerate any exposure of his privacy, especially being seen in his corpulent native suit. Another more normal person might have replied, "Yeah, I'm okay. It's just that there's a rat in the toilet bowl." But Speaker Blamer was not a normal person. He has had to be super cunning to get to his present situation in life. Being cunning means that you can instantly sense danger, being as alert as, say, a rat. And Speaker Blamer was already imagining the deriding headlines in the late-night show jokes if he disclosed what really prompted his impulsive cries of sheer terror as he leapt from the throne. So he replied, "Nothing much, boys, just one of those sudden spasms I get once in a while. Sure comes on fast, it goes away fast, too. I'll be right out." Rejoining the staff at the head of the conference table, albeit full of gas and undischarged wastes, the speaker went through the checklist for crushing the hopes of the downtrodden multitudes. His chief of staff reviewed the usual elements of the campaign against workers. First off, the speaker will say, "I always thought that if you raise the price of anything, you get less of it. The proposal to raise the minimum wage is a job killer." "Good soundbite," said his research assistant. The speaker nodded gravely, but when he heard the word bite, he silently winced. The operations assistant counted off the usual reliable economics professors who could supply objective warnings about losses of jobs in recession. The Fast Food and Big Box Retailer Association had begun a large ad buy on television and radio with the announcers' stentorian voices of dire gravity. The K Street lobbyists were already in action on Capitol Hill, marshaling the corporate PACs to make sure this drive was on the front burner, hinting to legislators that their employers might see this as a litmus test for their donations. Op-eds, letters to the editors, and editorial condemnation of economically disruptive higher wages and layoffs was already in the pipeline. About to burst, the speaker could not wait to end the meeting. "Okay, fellows, you seem to have the situation well in hand. It's not the first time we had to fight off this wage grab. Get to work." They all scattered, including an irrelevant intern who wondered to herself whether paying members of Congress would mean the government would end up with less of them. Paying members of Congress more, excuse me. The moment the door to his spacious office closed, the speaker literally lunged to his private toilet, whereupon he unloaded a vast quantity of feces, soft and semi-hard, 3 bursts worth. Before he could enjoy a moment of quiet satisfaction, a shrill shriek lifted him up as his eyes bulged. It was the black rat swimming in the bowl, propelling the terrified cry, "Yow, yow, yow." Again, he slammed down the toilet seat, kept his hand on the flush toilet handle, gritting his teeth as if to say, "On the way to oblivion, you dirty rat." His longtime secretary heard his yell and rushed to his bathroom. Mr. Speaker, what happened? Are you okay?" Recovering his composure, he replied, "I'm okay, Sarah, just more of those sudden spasms. I've got to get some physical therapy. By the way, did you schedule that fundraiser next week for an hour later?" "Yes, I did, Mr. Speaker," Sarah replied, sounding very relieved. Arriving home that early evening, he sat down to a healthy diet supper prepared by his adoring wife, Regina. Their 3 children were grown up, living in distant states, so they were empty nesters. "You seem unusually agitated, honey," said Regina. "Did you have a hard day?" "It seems every day is hard in these times," he replied, shrugging off her concern. "What a great meal always, Regina. Now I need some relaxing reading. Do you know where we put that colorful book of animals that we got as a wedding gift, anniversary gift years ago?" "Why, yes, Reginald. It came in 3 volumes, mammals, reptiles, and insects. Tell me which one you want and I'll get it for you." "Mammals," he replied. Sitting in his study, the speaker started reading about the rat. The word rat is derived from the Latin rodere, which means to gnaw. Rats produce litter several times a year with high infant mortality. If seen as weak, newborns are eaten by their parents and their stronger siblings. Over the centuries, rats have developed uncanny abilities to survive dangers everywhere, especially those produced by their close proximity to humans, whose detritus and garbage ironically provide the means by which they prosper and create new nests. Rats live everywhere, underground, in sewers and buildings, etc. Ralph Nader.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere. Arrest a sitting president. What he's doing is too important. He's too busy. And by the way, Blink is an... Anyway, we've got a video of... And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Anything Goes Friday. Oh, I wanted to mention Kevin McCarthy. And it's not just Kevin McCarthy. Remember Igor and Lev, as Rachel Maddow refers to them, or Lev and Igor? They're these two guys who are the grifters at the core of Trump's whole quid pro quo, his bribery and extortion scheme that he's trying to run against Ukraine, that Trump has been trying to run. And, you know, they've been like right at the center of this, and they were arrested as they were trying to flee the country being the United States. Well, Kevin McCarthy has not only received money for his super PAC, his Protect the House PAC from Igor and Lev, he has received money personally from Igor and Lev, according to Marcy Wheeler over at emptywheel.net. And he has keynoted an event with Kevin McCarthy, with Lev and Igor. And then yesterday, Kevin McCarthy comes out and says, this impeachment thing is a scam, and he quotes Alexander Hamilton, right? Right. And by the way, on Monday, this Sophia Tesfaye over at Alternate, on Monday, the Washington Post published an interview with a Ukrainian diplomat who claimed to have met with Senator Ron Johnson this summer and to discuss these conspiracy theories promoted by Trump. Johnson reportedly met with this guy for 30 minutes on the Capitol Hill and then repeated this unsubstantiated claim that the Democrats hacked themselves with the help of the Ukrainians in 2016. You know, Ron Johnson's up to his eyeballs in this. And then here's where it gets amazing. This is, they talk about burying the lead. This is halfway through the article. Political action committees for Republican Senators Mitch McConnell, Marco Rubio, and Lindsey Graham reportedly accepted $7.35 million in contributions from a Ukrainian-born oligarch with close ties to Russian President Vladimir Putin during the 2016 election. And then you got Thune and Kennedy, Republican Senators John Thune and John Kennedy, blocked a Democratic bill to provide funding for states to shore up election security. The next day, Senator Marsha Blackburn, Republican from Tennessee, quietly blocked 3 election security bills for the second time this year. What is it that Marsha Blackburn, why is it that Marsha Blackburn does not want you to have safe voting? You have to ask yourself, why is that? And finally, a billionaire has said to his buddies, hey, get over it about Elizabeth Warren. This is great. This is from Huffington Post. Billionaire and former Goldman Sachs partner Michael Novogratz urged his rich friends to lighten up about Senator Elizabeth Warren and her plans to impose a wealth tax if she's elected president. In an interview with Bloomberg News, he said to his buddies, you're not victims. You're the richest people in the world. How in God's name do you feel like a victim? It's insanity. They're going to come and get us. No, you're going to get taxed a little more. Lighten up. The way the country's functioning today, the bottom 60% aren't doing well. Warren is speaking to that group. She wants to redistribute. People in my world are really, really fearful of her. They don't like her. They're worried about her. They think she's anti-rich. It's a little carried away. He says Warren's a good politician as well as smart and witty. Amazing. A billionaire supporting Elizabeth Warren. Well, not supporting. I mean, you know, he said he'd rather have a centrist candidate that is, you know, one who takes corporate money. But, you know, what can you say? Frank in Phoenix, Arizona. Hey, Frank, what's on your mind?
Tom, I don't know how you can stand Republicans, but that's not what I'm wanting to call about. I was calling to find out if you could answer a question for me about the Supreme Court. How would we be able to add 2 more people to the court, and what would the procedure be? And I'll take that off the air so that you can get other callers on.
Okay. Thank you, Frank. Thank you very much. Here's how it works. Article 3, Section 2. The Constitution, the first 3 articles of the Constitution define, respectively, Article 1, the Congress, first among equals, the House and Senate. Article 2, the presidency, second among equals, and Article 3, the courts, the entire court system, including the Supreme Court, third. And in Article 3, Section 2, which defines specifically the Supreme Court, it says that the Supreme Court shall operate under exceptions defined by Congress. In other words, Congress can say to the Supreme Court, there are some things you may not rule on. And under regulations defined by Congress. Now, the principal regulation that Congress has used over the years to, quote, regulate Congress has been their budget, their building, and the number of people on the court. We started with, as I recall, 5. We went up to 7, then we went to 10. During the Lincoln administration, there were 10 members of the Supreme Court. Each one of these was the result of an act of Congress changing the number of members of the Supreme Court. When Lincoln was assassinated, Andrew Johnson became president. Congress got together and lowered the number down to 6 so that Andrew Johnson would not be able to appoint a Supreme Court justice. When Andrew Johnson left office and Ulysses Grant took over, Johnson was a Southern slaveholder and a fan of the South. Ulysses S. Grant was a Republican abolitionist. When he became president, the Congress met and they said, let's raise it back up, not to 10, but to 9. So it's an odd number, so you won't have 50-50 splits. And so it's been at 9 ever since whatever year that was, 1872 or something like that. And, or maybe 1869. But it's been at 9 ever since. But Congress, if you had a consensus in Congress, you'd have to have enough members of the Senate to break a filibuster, and you'd have to have a majority of members of the House. So it takes 60 or 61 senators and whatever the number is, 218, I think it is, to be a majority of the House of Representatives. Can simply vote to say the Supreme Court, instead of having 9 members, now has 11 members. And whoever is president gets to appoint 2 more members. And if that president happens to be Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren, all the better, right? But that's one way to do it. And Elizabeth Warren has explicitly openly talked about that. Another way is what Franklin Roosevelt proposed. He said any member over 70 becomes a Supreme Court Justice Emeritus. They're still in the court. They still draw a salary, so it's not violating the Constitution. But in aggregate, there were 5 of them at the time, as I recall. All 5 of those people over 70 have collectively 1 vote. So he gets to appoint 4 new members. But the court still only has 9 members, actual full-time members, because the emeritus members are, basically represented by 1 vote. That's another way to do it. Elizabeth Warren has talked about term limiting them. You serve on the court for 10 or 15 years, and then at the end of that time, you get passed back down to the lower courts, back to the federal court. If you came from the 4th Circuit, you go back to the 4th Circuit or whatever it may be. Typically, it's the D.C. Circuit. That is also constitutional. None of these things would require a constitutional amendment or anything like that. They all require a simple majority in the House and a filibuster-proof majority in the Senate. Thanks a lot for the call. Tim in Seattle. Hey, Tim, what's up?
Oh, hi, Tom. Yes, I'd like to talk to you today about a little-known provision in the Secure Act that passed the House in May.
And is being sat on by Mitch McConnell in the Senate, yeah.
Yes, and that's probably not a bad thing from this one perspective. The Secure Act basically takes inherited IRAs and taxes them at 10% per year for the first 10 years after you inherit your parents' IRA or whatever.
Why not just cash it out in the first year and pay the 10%? Well, no, it was pre-tax money to begin with.
Right, but the difference is that the current system, there's a formula involved. If you inherit money, say your parents die when you're 20 years old, and they leave you $1 million, just as a round number, then you are forced to take 16,000 of that $1 million and pay tax on it at 36% or whatever the top rate is.
Right.
At 20. So what you have left to invest and save, to buy a house, whatever, you got $984,000. Well,
if you keep it in the IRA, then it's going to continue to be taxed. But if you cash it out of the IRA, then you're just paying taxes as if you had income. I mean, what's wrong with taxing inherited wealth as income? That's what it is.
Well, what's wrong is the current system uses a formula that forces inheritors to take inherited IRAs at a 3 to 4% per year rate, which means you can leave that money untouched, and you don't have to. You're not forced to.
So you're saying basically this is a problem for somebody who inherits an IRA and they have a high enough income that they're paying a high tax rate.
It affects anybody who inherits an IRA, and I say that it prevents the intergenerational transfer of wealth in the middle class.
Interesting.
And it's just something that people should look at. Call your congressman and ask why they're doing this.
Okay, let me. I don't know what the specifics of what you're talking about here, Tim. I need to look into it a little more before I can endorse your call. But I'll check it out. Tim, thanks for the call, and thanks for listening to KBCS. We'll be back. Stick around. We got some science stuff coming up too.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Our Science Good, Bad, and the Ugly is coming up, plus your calls on Anything Goes Friday. Stick around. And welcome back. Michael in Princeton, Minnesota. Hey, Michael, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom.
Thanks for watching Free Speech.
Yeah, this is the second call from Princeton today, by the way.
Huh? That's great.
You were talking earlier about special needs people.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm not mistaken, I think on America's Got Talent, I think the guy that won the $1 million was a special needs blind guy.
Huh.
And he was an excellent singer and musician on the piano.
Yeah.
But I wanted to compliment you on your show and tell you how important it is. The other day, Dr. Phil had a show on, and in the middle of the show, he turned around and put on about a 5-minute segment about Medicare Advantage. And right shortly after that, they ran an ad. And
so he was he was talking favorably about Medicare Advantage?
Yeah, just basically telling now's the time to sign up for it, and he didn't give the counter to that. So I turned around and contacted his show and kind of challenged him to put on the counter to that.
Right.
And
I'm guessing that they got spiffed by the insurance companies. That was the price. That ad probably made a lot of money for them, and they wouldn't run the ad if they didn't get some editorial support for it. Which is,
I was surprised. I was surprised to see him having an actual person on stage interviewing her about it.
Yeah. See, on radio, that's illegal. It's called playola or plugola, unless you disclose that person is an advertiser. I don't know that rule applies to television, though.
Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, I challenged him to do the counter on it, and along with that, I turned around and called Biden and told him that, hey, we need Medicare for all. Peterson is one of the Minnesota legislators that voted with the Republicans. I called his office. It got to the point where my wife was looking at the phone bill, and she says, "You got a girlfriend out there? What is all these calls?"
You need to get an unlimited minutes plan, Michael. or pick up. You can pick up these VoIP phones. These internet-based phones. They're really cheap. And Phone.com was an advertiser on this program for a while, and they offer inexpensive telephone service that is virtually unlimited. You just run it over your computer or over your phone.
Yeah, well, your show is becoming very, very effective. In fact, when I call in, I have called before, you have to wait a whole lot longer to get a hold of you now, and I like that. I want people to come to your show, and I'm hoping that they follow my example too and call.
Yeah.
I've spent as much as 3 hours in the morning calling Congress people.
Wow.
To try to get stuff done, So
you're taking the get out there, get active, tag you're it seriously, Michael. That's the message. That's the bottom line of what you're saying here.
Yeah, and thank you very much.
Yeah, no,
very much.
It's a great thing. When you call these members of Congress, are you getting a positive response?
A lot of times, all I do is take a message. But I did find out that shortly around the vote time, and I called a few of the Republicans too, and then their message box is full. They can't take any more calls.
Right.
So I don't know if activism is filling their calls or if they're just shutting down the call box.
Right. Okay. Well, we'll find out. Michael, thank you very much for the call. It's great to hear from you. And and thanks for watching Free Speech TV. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere. And on salt and sugar and all these other things, it's nuts. You can check the whole thing out over at thomhartmann.com. Look for the video for our, the supporters of our program at thomhartmann.com. Hey, it's time for the good, the bad, and the very, very ugly in the context of science. The good. The Natural Resources Defense Council, also known as the NRDC, for taking the FDA to court over perchlorate. Perchlorate has been shown to harm the development of fetuses in young children, yet the FDA chose to continue to allow this harmful chemical in food and packaging. It's also made in rocket fuel, and it's in some commercial fertilizers. Eric D. Olson, Senior Strategic Director for Health and Food at NRDC, says perchlorate harms kids, and it's all over our food supply. The FDA has enough evidence of these harms and dangers to take action right now, and its refusal to ban this toxic chemical was unreasonable. In 2005, the FDA allowed perchlorate to be in some kinds of food packaging. In 2014, NRDC and other public health groups fought back to try to undo that decision, but the agency denied the petition in 2017. This latest lawsuit is to require that agency to review that petition again. Olson adds, quote, "The courts are absolutely key in blocking brazen Trump administration attempts like this one to ignore science and put people at risk for the benefit of private corporate interests." Well, good on you, NRDC. We should not be poisoning our children. The bad. Coca-Cola. According to a global audit of collected plastic trash conducted by the Break Free from Plastic Global Movement, Coca-Cola was announced as the most polluted brand in the world for the second year in a row. According to the report called Branded Volume 2, identifying the world's top corporate plastic polluters, the Atlanta-based beverage giant was responsible for more plastic litter than Nestle, Pepsi, and snack maker Mondelez combined, the next three on the list. Vice reported the plastic was counted during brand audits where Break Free from Plastic counted plastic litter collected in 484 cleanups in more than 50 countries on 6 continents in September. Juan Hernandez, global coordinator with Break Free from Plastic Movement, says this report provides more evidence that corporations urgently need to do more to address the plastic pollution crisis they've created. Their continued reliance on single-use plastic packaging translates to pumping more throwaway plastic into the environment. Recycling is not going to solve this problem. It's very bad, as plastic creates all kinds of problems in our environment. And the very, very ugly President Trump
And no, it's not the way he looks. It's for confirming his administration will start its official pullout from the 2015 Paris Agreement now. Say goodbye to America being a leader in the fight against the global climate crisis. The withdrawal officially begins the first week of November. And as Reuters reported, Trump argued at a natural gas conference in Pittsburgh, this is part of his America First policy. Malik Russell, a spokesman for the Climate Mobilization, a youth-led environmental advocacy group, said, this is really a betrayal of the next generation. And he's right. Alden Meyer, director of strategy and policy at the Union of Concerned Scientists, said President Trump's anti-science stance that climate change is not a serious threat demanding meaningful action puts the profits of fossil fuel polluters above the health and well-being of current and future generations. And he's right. Meyer added, it also impedes the ability of American companies and workers to compete with other companies like China and Germany in the rapidly expanding market for climate-friendly technologies. Fortunately, he said no other country is following President Trump out the door on Paris. Yes, pulling out of the Paris Agreement is very, very ugly and puts America last, not first. And welcome back. Anything Goes Friday here. Let's see, Terry in Hilo, Hawaii. Hey, Terry, what's up?
Hey, Tom, what's going on? I'm an avid watcher of your program on TV.
Thank you.
And if anything goes Friday, I've been listening. You know, they had that thing about the jobs report and employment being up. Mm-hmm. Do they know that, the people don't know that they're not telling that one individual has 1, 2, or 3 jobs?
Yeah.
It's not more people working.
You're absolutely right. Remember when George Bush was running for his second term in 2004, and he had that woman up on stage, and he said, so you've got a job, and she says, I work 3 jobs. And he goes, oh, isn't that wonderful? How all-American. She works 3 jobs. That should be a disgrace, right? Nobody should have to work 3 jobs.
I do remember that. It was like, you know, ever since 2000, I've been paying more attention to the economy and what people of money think of people, the working class.
Right.
They do not. We're expendable.
They don't give a rat's ass. Yeah, we're just drones in the machine. I mean, that's
push you out of the way next, and then you got to pay your union dues and all that kind of stuff. You know.
Yeah.
But it's
which is the price of having some job security. You know, it's a good thing.
Yeah, that's for sure. That's for sure. But I watch you religiously, 3 hours a day. So you're
thank
like
you,
the
Terry.
best.
Be sure to get up and walk around during the breaks. You know, keep your blood vessels healthy and your brain and body working. You know, it's do it.
Yeah, that's all
Sean's
we got.
doing her little exercise here during between the, you know, when we do the book reports, the pre-recorded book reports during the break, or when our commercial station is going to break. Terry, thank you for your kind words, and thanks for listening to the program. We'll be back. It's Anything Goes Friday here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Jeff Cohen's going to drop by in about a half hour to tell us about a new movie that's out that's just going to blow you away. It's amazing. And but we'll be continuing to take your phone calls throughout the day, or throughout the next hour. So stick around. Anything Goes Friday here on the Thom Hartmann Program, helping you win the water cooler wars and the Thanksgiving wars.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Cokeland, The Secret History of Coke Industries and Corporate Power in America by Christopher Leonard. This is from the preface. On May 18th, 1981, 4 Wall Street bankers traveled to Wichita, Kansas. They went there to make an offer to Charles Koch, the CEO of an obscure mid-size energy company. The bankers from Morgan Stanley wanted to convince Koch to take his family's company public, offering shares for sale on the New York Stock Exchange. Their deal was squarely in line with the conventional wisdom of corporate America at the time. Going public was seen as a natural progression for companies like Koch Industries, offering them access to big pools of money and promising enormous paydays for the existing team of executives. All it required from the CEO was to surrender control. Morgan Stanley, in return, would collect a small fortune in fees. Charles Koch was 45 years old. He had run Koch Industries since he was 32 when his father died suddenly. He was trim, tall, and had an athlete's build. He spoke quietly in meetings and seemed almost passive. The bankers laid out their plan to take Koch public. They revealed what, to most executives at least, might have been the most significant detail. If Charles Koch agreed to the deal, he could earn $20 million overnight. The bankers seemed incredulous when they prepared a confidential memo about Koch's reaction. He does not want this cash, the memo reported. Charles Koch calmly explained to them why their offer made no sense. His company was breathtakingly profitable. It operated in vital, deeply complex corners of the American energy industry. During the 1980s, Koch Industries was the largest purchaser and transporter of U.S. crude oil. It owned an oil refinery. It employed teams of commodity traders who bought and sold a wildly diverse menu of raw materials and financial products, from gasoline to paper futures contracts. This might have encouraged most CEOs to take their company public. Koch Industries, however, did not want outsiders to know how much money its traders were earning. Taking the company public would expose too many of its secrets. The memo said, certain of Koch's commodity traders are particularly worried that their high salaries, once disclosed to the public, would be used against them by their trading partners. Secrecy was a strategic necessity for Koch Industries. Charles Koch did not want to surrender it. He also didn't want to surrender control. He had a specific, clear vision of how to run his company, and he didn't need Wall Street investors to interfere. If the bankers expected Charles Koch to go along with the conventional wisdom of their time, then they, like so many outsiders, did not understand him. Beneath his low-key veneer, Charles Koch was, at his core, a fighter. He had unmovable ideas about how things should be, and he did not back down when challenged. When he was challenged by his own brothers for control of Koch Industries, he fought them in a bitter legal battle that lasted decades. When he was challenged by members of a powerful labor union during his first years as CEO, he fought them even as they committed an act of industrial sabotage that nearly destroyed Koch's oil refinery. When the FBI and the U.S. Department of Justice launched a criminal investigation into Koch Industries' oil gathering business, Charles Koch fought them with every legal and political tool at his disposal. When a liberal Congress and President Barack Obama sought to impose regulations on the fossil fuel industry to control greenhouse gas emissions, Charles Koch fought them in ways that changed U.S. politics. In each of these fights, Charles Koch prevailed. When Charles Koch dismissed the bankers in 1981, it was just a small skirmish in the larger war to control Koch Industries. After prevailing in that fight, he created a company that was true to his vision. He avoided the snares that entangled many publicly traded companies that report their financial results to investors every 3 months. Koch Industries didn't have to think quarter to quarter. The company thinks year to year. An internal think tank and deal-making committee called the Development Group will sometimes think through a business deal on a timeline measured in decades. This long-term view made Koch more nimble where other companies stumbled. In 2003, for example, Koch Industries bought a group of money-losing fertilizer plants when no publicly traded company was willing to take the risk. Today, those plants are as profitable as a broken ATM machine that spews out cash around the clock. Unlike publicly traded companies, Koch Industries does not pay out rich dividends to investors. Charles Koch insists on reinvesting at least 90% of the company's profits, fueling its constant expansion. This strategy laid the foundation for decades of continuous growth. Koch Industries expanded continuously by purchasing other companies and branching out into new industries. It specialized in the kind of businesses that are indispensable to modern civilization, but which most consumers never directly encounter. The company is embedded in the hidden infrastructure of everyday life. Millions of people use Koch's products without ever seeing Koch's name attached. Koch refines and distributes fossil fuels, from gasoline to jet fuel, on which the global economy is dependent. Coke is the world's third largest producer of nitrogen fertilizer, which is the cornerstone of our modern food system. Coke makes the synthetic materials used in baby diapers, waistbands, and carpets. It makes the chemicals used for plastic bottles and pipes. It owns Georgia Pacific, which makes the wall panels, beams, and plywood required to build homes and office buildings. It makes napkins, paper towels, stationery, newspaper, and personal hygiene products. Koch Industries owns a network of commodities trading offices in Houston, Moscow, Geneva, and elsewhere, which are the circulatory system of modern finance. The book, Kochland, by Christopher Leonard. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Modern society that the platform has already aided and abetted. But it showed me just how integral my online identity had become to so many facets of my life. The book by Christopher Wiley.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back. It's Anything Goes Friday here. We've covered a lot of territory over the last couple hours. I just wanted to close a circle. Somebody called and said, who were the people who didn't vote? There were 3 Republicans and 1 Democrat who didn't vote on the shall we open an impeachment inquiry question yesterday in the U.S. House of Representatives. And I didn't know off the top of my head, so I said, I don't know, we'll look it up. Sean looked it up while we were on the air, gave me the list. I read the list on the air. But I qualified it. I said, you just never know. Typically, particularly for a really important vote, when people don't show up, it's because somebody's sick or there's a family emergency or something like that. And sure enough, every single one of those people who didn't vote had a very, very legitimate excuse. Sean, can you remind me of what they were? Heiss had a funeral. His father had died. John Rose had a family emergency. Timmons was on National Guard duty. And McEachin was sick. You know, I said out of 435 people, you're going to have a few people who have these kind of crises or who just have the flu. And it turned out that that was the case. So, you know, please don't hold it against any of them. I'm sure that had those situations not been the case, they would have done it. So, anyhow, as I said, it's Anything Goes Friday, so let's pick up your phone calls. Judy in Bayview, Idaho. Hey, Judy, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I just I had to rant a little bit about the Medicare the Medicare Advantage plan.
Okay.
My first couple of years on Medicare, I fell for it, and the only thing that changed was that I was restricted and limited about what doctors I could see or what I could do, and I guess this time of year just drives me crazy because we're just inundated with all these companies that want to give you everything for free.
Right. Only when you look at the fine print, it's not everything and it's not free.
It's not even close.
Right.
I've called a few of them just to see if the $0 was available in my area. Not that I would have done it because I learned my lesson, but of course it's never available in anyone's area.
So when they say on TV, it may not even cost you anything. It's just, that's true of 35 people in some county in southwest Missouri or something.
Absolutely. And, now it's dental and prescriptions and hearing and vision, and it's just all a big fat lie, and it makes me
So
feel
have you had a
bad for
specific
people.
experience with any of those add-ons that tells you that it's a lie, Judy?
The first year I went with the United Healthcare plan and found myself just tied up and not able to see who I needed to see or get the services that I needed to have. And
in other words, they wouldn't authorize payments to the doctors that your doctors referred you to, or for the procedures that they asked for?
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. And I spent all of my time trying to find a doctor or a procedure that would be covered. And the second year, I decided, well, I'll try Humana.
Mm-hmm.
And I did that, and it was even worse. And when I tried to get out of the plan, I had to actually close out my bank account, because you cannot stop them from taking your money every month.
Really?
So, and I haven't done it since. And I try to spread the word to everyone I know that, our mamas taught us better than this.
Yes.
We don't get great things for free. And when I hear them say, the information is free, well, I try not to scream, but it's hard not to.
Yeah,
So
yeah. No, I find myself yelling back at these commercials on TV. We're just, it's a tsunami coming on, and it's like, you should just ask yourself. I mean, you're looking literally every day at tens of millions of dollars worth of advertising by these health insurance companies, telling you what wonderful things they're going to do for you. Who's paying for that advertising?
Tom.
The people on Medicare Advantage are paying for that advertising.
Oh, we're just drowning in their advertising, and I was going to say millions, but the more I see, the more I think we're getting into the billions.
It may well be. Who
and
knows?
Of course, they just want to help us all because they're so good-hearted.
Oh yeah,
so,
of course, yeah. It's got nothing to do with CEOs taking millions.
I'm so glad I got to get that out. Thank you. It's so much better talking with you than screaming at my TV. So
okay.
If only we could find someone that would do commercials rebutting all this,
the problem is there's no
people are
profit
only
in that. It's that's the sad
I
thing.
know.
I mean, there's a small amount of profit. The Medicare Advantage, the Medigap plans, the ones where you keep actual Medicare and then you buy a small health insurance policy to fill in the 20%. Those are heavily regulated by the Medicare law, and so they don't have rip-off provisions in them, generally speaking, and so they're not quite as profitable for the health insurance companies, and so you're not seeing very many
legal?
ads for those. Yeah, they're still legal. I have one.
Not for long.
I wish that there were some of the companies that offer them. Unfortunately, most of the companies that offer them also offer Medicare Advantage. But I wish that some of the companies that offer them would run ads going, don't get ripped off by Medicare Advantage. Get real Medicare and our Medigap plan. And here's how wonderful our Medigap plan is. That's something I would, if one of them wanted to advertise on this show, I would take that kind of an ad. I would not take a Medicare Advantage ad for this show. So anyhow, Judy, thank you for the call. I got to move along, but thank you very much.
Can I say one more thing?
Sure.
Just one more quick thing about this.
Yeah.
I had a friend who, my state just this year took the Medicare expansion, and she's on Medicaid. So she, of course, it was grabbed by Blue Cross Blue Shield. And so all they're doing is taking over Medicare and privatizing it
Medicaid.
Without us, even
that's
fighting it.
pretty much only in the Republican states. But yeah, the Republican states got this waiver under Obamacare to basically take the money that they have for Medicaid, the federal money that they have in the state matching part, and pour that into privatized plans that get administered by private for-profit health insurance companies.
And that was one of the terrible things that Obama had to concede to.
Yeah.
To get the ACA through. So, okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. And if I ever see a Medigap plan on your program, I'll be happy.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Judy. Thank you. It's great to hear from you. I appreciate it. Howard in Muncie, Indiana. Hey, Howard, what's on your mind today?
Quick statement. Before the 2016 elections, going back in history somewhat, the mantra about the liberals, the Democrats, Hollywood, all of them to a T said there is no way that Trump would be elected. Absolutely no way.
Actually, Michael Moore was saying that he was going to get elected. I was saying that I was worried that there was a good chance he'd get elected.
particularly given the lies that he was telling. You know, he said he was going to make sure everybody had health insurance and it was cheaper than Obamacare and more comprehensive. It was a lie. He said he was going to break up the big banks. It was a lie. He said that he was going to improve our school systems. It was a lie. He said he was going to support workers. It was a lie. He said he was going to bring back jobs. It was a lie. But, you know, a lot of those things sounded really appealing, Howard, to people probably like you.
Tim, let me finish, then I'll give it back to you. Probably within a week after the election, the media, mainly the radio stations, came up with the home of the resistance, the home of the resistance, the home of the resistance. Well, they all resisted and resisted and resisted. Finally, that went away. You have a clown out in California making statues of Trump with undersized parts. He went away. Then Mueller comes up, and Rachel Maddow and Lawrence O'Donnell are cheering, hip hip hooray, we got Trump now. We know what happened there.
Well, yeah, Mueller indicted 26 people. He's got a bunch of people sitting in prison for their conspiracies with Trump. You got Michael Cohen, who's sitting in prison right now for a campaign finance violation that Trump ordered and signed the check for. But he can't be prosecuted. Mueller couldn't prosecute him because the Department of Justice said you can't prosecute a sitting president. So instead, his lawyer's in jail. I mean, this guy is clearly a criminal, Howard. And, you know, if you want to keep defending him, you know, go to Facebook. Emily, which won't take me, but I'm sure they'll take you, Howard. Emily in Bullhead City, Arizona. Hey, Emily, what's up?
I just want to give a shout out to a good Democrat who's running for the Senate in Arizona.
Okay, go for it.
His name is Mark Kelly.
Oh, that's what's her name? That's Gabby Gifford's husband.
Yes.
He's an astronaut.
He is running.
Yep.
Yep, former astronaut. He's running for the Sally McSally's.
Oh, he's going to give her a run for her money.
Well, he's not taking any PAC money, and they've already raised a lot of money against him. The Republican Party said they're going to stop him in his tracks. So,
well, Emily, keep us up to date on how that race goes, okay?
I will.
I'm fascinated by it. I don't live in Arizona, so I won't catch all the news. But you know, over the
well, I just wanted to give a shout out to let other people know because of the fact that he's not getting any money. He's only grassroots money. A lot of people, even in Arizona, don't even know he's running.
Right. So plug Mark Kelly into your DuckDuckGo search engine, and you know, if you're inclined, you can toss a few bucks his way. Emily, thank you for the call. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's Anything Goes Friday on the Thom Hartmann Program. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Jeff in Portland, Oregon, listening on X-Ray FM. Hey, Jeff, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Happy Anything Goes Friday. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
Please allow me to quickly congratulate Liz Warren for unveiling her Medicare for All plan and doing so in a way that beats the naysayers at their own game.
Amen.
And, you know, presenting it as an enormous tax cut, I think that's a suggestion Bernie's campaign should definitely take a cue from, framing it that way.
Yeah, I'm with you.
So, Tom, I want to ask you a question about Nancy Pelosi. First, let me congratulate her on the handling of the impeachment process so far. She seems to be acknowledging that as the Democratic leadership puts this case against the Trump crime family together, the ultimate jury will be the American people. And if the Republicans in the Senate choose to be derelict in their duty to the Constitution, if they want to turn their backs on truth and justice, then we, the people, will politically bury them in the very near future, hopefully. So, but my question for you, Tom, is concerning Speaker Pelosi. If it's true that, according to reports, she's eager to approve Trump's new version of NAFTA, A, why would she throw him a bone this late in his disastrous so-called presidency? Or B, if she really wants to, why not use it as a major bargaining chip to undo so much of the damage she's already done? You were talking about the Paris Agreement and so many more issues.
This is an issue. I mean, I'm very, very familiar with the whole NAFTA thing and the whole new version of it, which is tilted heavily toward the pharmaceutical industry, but does on the good side get rid of these courts that are run by corporations where trade disputes are litigated. So there's an upside to downside to it. But my guess would be, if everything you say is true, if she is trying to fast track
I saw that on the CBC website, the Canadian Broadcasting Network. Yeah.
I would guess that if she can pull this off, it would shut down the Trump talking point about the Do Nothing Congress. It would shut down that talking point, even though they've passed 260 pieces of legislation now that are sitting in Mitch McConnell's bottom drawer. Most Americans don't know that. The media does not repeat that. The media doesn't talk about it. When Congress passes good laws, they don't get covered because the media just spends all their time covering Donald Trump. So it would be a way to prove that Congress is actually doing things, number one. Number two, I'm guessing that she would extract a pound of flesh for it. She would say, okay, I'll do this if you'll do that. I don't know what kind of deal she's making, but she's a consummate deal maker. I mean, she knows what she's doing. And then finally, it wouldn't surprise me if a lot of members of the Democratic caucus are taking money from the pharmaceutical industry, and the pharmaceutical industry is aggressively promoting this thing. And so she's probably getting pressure from her own caucus. Maybe she's even taking money from the pharmaceutical industry. I don't know. But I'm guessing that that's the confluence of variables on that thing, Jeff. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, those are all very valid points that you raise. It's quite a juxtaposition, though, set against McTurtle holding up Merrick Garland's nomination at this time in Obama's presidency. I mean, there was a year to go with Obama when he did that, and so that just seems a little befuddling.
Yeah, that was a crime against democracy. That was an absolute crime against democracy. I get it, Jeff. I completely get it. But we've had this conversation a couple of times with what's her name from TradeWatch.org. Oh, Lori Wallach. Thank you, Sean. And we'll get back to it. Jeff, thank you for the call. I don't have a specific answer for you. I'm sorry. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere. So check it out at ThomHartmann.com. Welcome back to Anything Goes Friday. Heads up, Jeff Cohen, I believe, is going to be in the studio. He hasn't shown up yet. Has he? No, hasn't come through the door. Okay, well, we'll see. Gwendolyn in Rialto, California. Hey, Gwendolyn, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Thank you for taking my call. Sure. But I was wondering, have you heard, or is this true in terms of the reason why the recyclable centers are closed up in California is as a result of the tariff war, and China is no longer taking plastic recyclables, so therefore the centers has closed. So now the only ones open is like the private ones. Now. But in terms of
I don't know the answer to your question, Gwendolyn, but I do know that China has stopped taking a lot of our garbage. And I'm not sure that has to do with the tariff wars. I think that has to do with the industrialization of China has reached the point where they no longer are in need of and thus willing to do the low-paid, dangerous, pollution-intensive scut work kind of stuff of extracting chips from computers and things so that you can recover the rare earth metals and recycling things. I mean, it's a business, but it's a business that's not high in profit, and it is very, very high in pollution and contamination and stuff. So I'm guessing that has more to do with it than the
than the, what do you call it, the trade war. Yeah.
Tariff war.
Yeah, there you go. Gwendolyn, thanks for the call. Gloria in Meadville, Pennsylvania. Hey, Gloria, what's up? You want to get back to the discussion about schools?
Yes, the special education. I was kind of mortified to hear one of your previous callers talking about how his brother was treated.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to say I was a learning support aide in a elementary school, a public school, for 36 years. And IDEAS, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, was passed in 1974 and then re-upped again in 97 and 2004.
Right.
But I was not just an aide, I was an advocate for the children.
Right.
And I just wanted to say it's terrible what his brother was put through. I don't know what year it was that his brother was in public school when that happened to him.
Right.
But I just want to say it varies from school district to school district how some of our kids are treated. We have a school district 6 miles away from where we were, and they were obviously, when they came in with their individual education program plan, that it was very scant. So it depends on the money that comes from the federal, state, and the school board. I mean, if you get a bunch of Republicans on a school board, they don't want their taxes to go up, so they squeeze some of these programs. But
and this is the problem with local
on
funding of education.
Well, and also the support from the administrators.
Yeah.
If you need a good special education director, you need a good principal and teacher training. I have found I was an inclusion aide, and he was talking about mainstreaming, your former caller, and that was kids getting dumped in a regular classroom that needed support that didn't have any support.
Right.
And I was on the other end of the spectrum. I was an inclusion aide, and when appropriate, my special education students would be included in the regular classroom. Many times, most of the day, they were learning disabled.
That's great, because you do want the social aspect of mainstreaming. You just don't want the educationally disruptive aspect of it with, profoundly special needs. Kids who are, facing profound challenges.
Right, and that's when they talk about when appropriate, and that's where the IEP, the individual education
I get
plan
it.
of each individual.
Gloria, I want to get one last caller in here before the end of the hour, or the end of the half hour here. Bruce in Palmdale, California. Thank you, Bruce. What's on your mind today?
The injustice that was done to my congressperson, Katie Hill.
Yes,
by
it's
the
terrible.
right-wing scumbags.
Yeah, and it turns out that the person who released the photos was working for a Republican politician.
Yeah, it's just 26 years I've lived under corrupt, inept Republican congresspeople, and we finally, we turned the district, and these scumbags. I'm sorry, I just.
Yeah, no, I agree with you.
It's been a bittersweet week, with the Trump. I'm so happy about that.
Yeah, it turns out that the political hack who published her picture, her name was Jennifer Von Lahr. She works at redstate.com, and she also published it over at Daily Mail. And neither publication pointed out that she. And then she encouraged people to learn more about Republican candidate Mike Garcia on social media, right? And in a tweet she said, "Let's flip Hill's seat." This was a hit job, Bruce. It was a hit job. Katie Hill got whacked, and this is wrong. Thank you, Bruce, for the call.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And meanwhile, we can't get a rapist out of the White House. I mean, it all adds up. Anyhow, Jeff Cohen is up next, and then after that, we'll continue taking your calls. Our book for today on the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Kingdom of Lies, Unnerving Adventures in the World of Cybercrime by Kate Fazzini. This is from the preface. It didn't take me long in my career as a cybersecurity executive to figure out everyone was lying to me. The biggest lie of all came at the very beginning, that cybersecurity is hard, too hard, certainly too difficult for someone who lacks years and years of deep technical training. That is no place for writers. That thicket of incomprehensible jargon alone seemed meant to discourage outsiders like me from entering the field. They told me I could never hope to understand the terminology unless I'd worked around it for a very long time, unless I had a special and complicated certification, unless I knew how to take apart and reassemble a computer, unless I knew how to code in Python and could read it, interpret it, and spot problems on sight. And if I somehow managed to learn the lingo, the learning curve for the rest of it would prove insurmountable. Lies, lies, lies. It's unfortunate because there's a huge gap between the demand for cybersecurity workers and the people available to fill those jobs. I think one of the reasons for that is because people can't imagine themselves doing this kind of work. Can you use a smartphone, make a PowerPoint, think on your feet, ever organize a night out to the movies with your friends that went well and nobody crashed their car to or from the event? Welcome to the 21st century's hottest career path. Are you able to charm the pants off women? Did you escape an abusive marriage? Have you ever hosted a toddler's birthday party at your home? Honey, I want you on my cybersecurity team. After reading the stories in this book, you will understand that what makes cybersecurity complicated is the complexity of human beings. So if you know how to deal with people, you can handle internet security. If you understand what makes people tick, not only will you be able to recognize a threat, you'll be one step ahead of your adversary. During my career as a cybersecurity executive at multinational corporations, a journalist for Wall Street Journal and later CNBC, and a professor at Georgetown University, I've met a lot of fascinating people. From the hackers who perpetrate malicious attacks to the security professionals who try to prevent these incidents from happening, and the alphabet soup of government agencies that do damage control. At the end of the day, they're all fathers, sons, mothers, sisters, and spouses. In other words, people just like us. Yes, the white hats cross paths with black hats and change alliances more frequently than you might expect, but they're driven by the same desires as the rest of us, even if sometimes it feels as if everyone in cybersecurity is allergic to the truth. As a professional, I was told a great many lies about the field I've grown to love so much. After becoming a journalist on the cybersecurity beat, I was told even more. Here are a few. Let me introduce you to the hacker community. This lie is usually delivered with a wink and a nod from someone who thinks they know every hacker on the planet. The truth of the matter is there is no hacker community. Sure, the guys who make a splash at the big annual conferences might say otherwise, but every country, every state, every faction, every identifying group has its own community of people who hack computers. Some of them are extremely conservative. Others are massively liberal. Some fall in between. Some wear suits and ties and work as lawyers during the day, while others look like everyday citizens and have great people skills as they pursue the idiosyncratic agendas. Some are good guys who got fed up with the low pay and boring duties and became criminals. Some are criminals who ended up being good guys. Many start and end their careers on either end of that spectrum. Some, including many you'll meet in this book, are extremely proficient hackers who have no time or inclination to identify with any community at all. As a journalist, I was astonished at the number of people who came out of the woodwork to offer me exclusive access to the hacker community. I couldn't help but notice that the members of the source's hacker community were often people just like him or her. My point is there are many different types of people working in this field, and I can guarantee you that a lot of them are exactly like you. Here's another lie. He's a luminary in the cybersecurity field. He's probably not. Fame and luminescence don't typically intersect in this field. The people I've met who are actual geniuses aren't famous, and most of them don't have social media profiles. They tend not to pontificate on areas outside their expertise. The people who are constantly headlining conferences and who are so often offered up to me for interviews have less insight than those who stay underground. Anything a high-profile hacker is willing to share typically carries with it a massive and crystal clear agenda that I've learned to spot from a mile away. Even if a conversation is off the record, the intel coming from a top government official or other marquee corporate cybersecurity name carries little novel information. The only people who have illuminated the way for me in this world, and in this book, have been genuine practitioners who never held a C-level title. You've never heard of them, and because I've changed their names to protect their privacy, you probably never will. They are luminaries not because of the degrees they've collected or the events they've headlined, but because they carry a lantern that guides the path for others. These types of people typically don't have a public relations team. One of my favorite lies, he doesn't know what he's talking about. This one is usually delivered by someone who asserts that he or she knows the cybersecurity field better than anyone else. These people will brag that they know what it's like to be a hacker and can do things that no one else in the room can do. I'm always wary of those who try to establish their bona fides by discrediting the expertise of other cybersecurity professionals. The depth and breadth of this field is so vast that anyone who works in it is an expert at some part of it. And I have yet to meet someone who is an expert at all of it. Not even close. Every view of an incident is informed by the reviewer, what he sees, what her level of expertise is, and that changes over time. It's like asking someone who lives in the Plaza to describe Manhattan. The book is Kingdom of Lies by Kate Fazzini. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And in the studio with me is our old buddy Jeff Cohen, media critic, lecturer. You were on Fox News for 5 years. You were the producer of Phil Donahue's show back in the day on MSNBC. But you're the founding director of the Park Center for Independent Media at Ithaca College, where you're an associate professor of journalism. Your most recent book, Cable News Confidential, My Misadventures in Corporate Media. You're the founder of Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, FAIR. Your CV is larger than mine. Co-founder of rootsaction.org. And you've got a new movie out. Is the website jeffcohen.com where people can find out about the movie?
jeffcohen.org.
Excuse me.
I'm doing a tour of Oregon with this movie. I'll be doing Q&As all over Oregon, starting with Portland on Sunday at Cinema 21 at 4 o'clock. And then I'm going to Ashland, Eugene, Florence, Astoria.
I see you're in Eugene 3 times.
Yeah,
but
I'm big in Eugene.
Yeah.
But the movie is called The Corporate Coup d'Etat. It's directed by Fred Peabody. I was a co-producer. It talks about the 40 years. It's what you talk about every day, but we have 90 minutes of riveting interviews with victims of the corporate coup. So we're talking about the last 40 years of neoliberalism, the 40-year takeover of U.S. political institutions by big corporations. And we have some dynamic segments where we take Philip Martin's one of the great African-American reporters at public radio. We send him to Ohio, Youngstown, to talk to former union workers, lifelong Democrats, who voted for Obama twice, then voted for Bernie against Hillary in the 2016 primary, and then they flipped over and voted for Trump.
Right.
So that's...
I know some of those people.
Yeah. Oh, no. Well, for us, it's just fascinating. We're talking about... The movie is, how did we get to Trump? Right. And we show Trump as the symptom of the disease that you talk about every day called corporatism. And what we're saying, obviously, we want to remove Trump as quickly as possible. But if we only remove Trump without addressing the corporate takeover of our political institutions, the economy, the media, then we're going to get a slicker, smarter Trump in 4 or 8 years.
Well, that's my biggest fear, frankly. My biggest fear is that, whether Trump gets reelected or not, that in 8 years from now, or even 4 years from now, excuse me, in the 2024 election, that and my guess is it's going to be Mitt Romney, that you're going to have somebody come along who has the friendly face, who seems moderate, who seems like a nice guy, who has a nice CV. Everybody kind of likes him, and we will have friendly fascism.
Yeah, I believe whoever the next Republican leader is going to have to be more populist than Romney. It's got to be someone who can
Romney
believe
can reinvent himself.
He'll have to.
Yeah.
I mean, Trump has shown the playbook.
Yes.
What our movie Corporate Coup shows is that when faced, there's so much despair and anger and And frankly, the middle class has been hollowed out across these Rust Belt states that Trump narrowly beat Hillary in. And the playbook for them now is that the Republican has to pose as the populist and characterize the Democrat as corporate status quo, go slow, yes, no. And that's my fear.
Which
that
tragically about a third of the Democratic Party.
No doubt. No doubt. I mean, in the movie, we sort of suggest that the corporations control 99% of the Republican Party and approximately half of the Democratic Party.
Right.
One of the things we show in the movie is the great reporter from The Intercept, Lee Fong. We have him on.
A dear friend. He's a brilliant guy.
Tremendous young reporter. He's on Capitol Hill, and he's confronting the lawmakers and lobbyists the same day that they vote to weaken the Dodd-Frank protections on Wall Street. And there were dozens of Democratic House members and senators. Two of them were running for president. John Delaney, the congressman from Maryland, voted with the Republicans and Trump to weaken Dodd-Frank. So did Michael Bennet, the senator from Colorado. So did Tim Kaine, Hillary Clinton's running mate. So it's great to see Lee Fong confronting people about the power of the lobbyists right when the banking lobby has won a major victory.
We had John Delaney on the show last week, and his pitch was, I'm more progressive than Pete Buttigieg on Medicare for all.
He is, on that one issue.
I know.
Yeah, I mean, Buttigieg is not that progressive.
He's figured out that progressive sells.
Yeah. You know? Well, he did make I heard that. I listened to your show a lot, Professor Hartmann, and he did
Professor Cohen?
Yeah, he did make the argument that his program is more progressive and more inclusive than Mayor Pete's or Biden. And he's right.
Or Klobuchar.
Yeah. And the most progressive, of course, is Warren and Sanders on including everyone, taxing the rich to pay for it all. But, I mean, the reason I'm so excited about this new documentary, and for those who don't live in Oregon, we are releasing it to the masses in the middle of November. You'll be able to buy it on DVD anywhere. You'll be able to see video on demand on any platform.
The movie, again, is called The Corporate Coup d'Etat.
Right. And it features Cornel West, Chris Hedges, Matt Taibbi, Lee Fong, Maude Barlow from Canada, great critic of corporate-friendly trade deals, Sarah Jaffe, an expert on social movements, whether it's the Tea Party or Occupy Wall Street. But more important than our experts, and we've got some of the great ones, is talking to working-class people, black, white, and talking to them about the despair of witnessing a democracy sort of falling apart as the corporations take power, and what do you do when you're faced with that reality? Right. And, you know, we got rave reviews. We're coming the day after Halloween. The Hollywood Reporter reviewed a very positive review of our documentary, and they said, a horror film of the most realistic kind, which I think is a great description of what we tried to do. And obviously, when I go around with the movie, we talk about what are the solutions. And the solutions, what you talk about at the end of every show, which is people have got to get active or you lose the democracy to the corporate powers that be. And the good news is, I mean, you know, in this 40 years of the corporate coup d'etat, unionization has gone down to next to nothing. It's like 10.5%.
6% in the private sector.
Yeah, and when you and I were growing up in Michigan, 1 out of 3 wage and salary workers was in the union. That's the bad news. The good news, last year, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, almost 500,000 workers engaged in work stoppages, the most in 32 years. So there's exciting, obviously, young people are fighting on climate change. Workers are fighting around teachers and nurses and the General Motors, the UAW strikers against General Motors. There's more activism that's class-based, that's saying we want a democracy that puts the majority first and not the 1%. And there's a lot of activism, and you don't see it on the mainstream media. You hear about it on independent shows like yours.
Yeah. I published an op-ed last week pointing out that the Gillens and Page study from Northwestern and Princeton, that the probability, well, back up, the definition of democracy is that the will of the people expressed, of representative democracy, the will of the people expressed at the voting box translates into legislation, translates into things happening.
And Gillens and Page documented, this was in 2014, documented that that's no longer the case in the United States. The bottom 90%, the policies that they favor are actually less likely than random chance to happen. Right. And the policies that are favored by the top 10% are, substantially greater than random chance, a high probability, double the probability of happening.
I mean,
and that's not democracy. We've lost our democracy. We've become an oligarchy. That's what Jimmy Carter said on this show back about 5 years ago.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought up the Gillens study, and I was thrilled. The good news is that in many universities and colleges, in political science classes, they teach that study.
That's
My daughter was telling me about it when she was a first-year student at Hunter College. But, go back before the corporate coup, which started in the late 70s and obviously with Reagan in the early 80s. Go back before that, and if you look at, from like the beginning of World War II, for the next 25, 26, 27 years, real income for workers in this country doubled.
Right.
So what you had was in the 30s and 40s this great, the union movements, the socialist movements making demands, and during that 30-year period, 40 years, from late 30s to late 70s, the disparity between rich and poor was shrinking.
Yep.
The middle class was growing. You and I saw it when we were growing up in Michigan. And so what this documentary deals with is what happened beginning in the late 70s and with Reagan in the 80s, where you've had this corporate takeover of our institutions.
And in my opinion, the thing that opened the door for it, the trigger for the whole thing, was Lewis Powell in 1976. I'm not talking about the Powell memo. In 76, in the Buckley versus Vallejo decision, for the first time in the history of the United States, the Supreme Court ruled, and they have no authority to make law under the Constitution, but they literally made law out of nothing. And they ruled that if a billionaire wants to own an individual politician or even multiple politicians or wants to influence policy with his or her money, that money is their free speech. And then 2 years later in the First National Bank versus Bellotti decision in 78, they extended that logic to corporations. And that opened in 79 and 1980 the floodgates for billionaire and corporate money to come into the Republican Party, who was standing there with their arms wide open saying, please, please, we've been decimated because of Nixon. We'll take anything.
Right.
But
see, I remember
that was the great sellout.
No doubt about it. And then continue it into the 80s and 90s, where the Clintonites within the Democratic Party are getting that money.
Oh, yeah. Well, that happened in let's see, Clinton was elected in 92. That happened in 1990 when Al Fromm, I've got the book on the shelf. Al Fromm wrote a book bragging about it.
Right. Well, that was the Democratic Leadership Council, was this corporate front within the Democratic Party. And then by the 1990s, we talk about this in our movie, by the 1990s, there was one pro-corporate thing passed with Bill Clinton, the Democrat in the White House, and Newt Gingrich, the Republican Speaker of the House, and they're ending welfare as we know it.
Right. And bragging about it.
Yes.
And the era of big government is over.
They're giving us the telecommunications bill, which
wiped out our media,
right?
Which is why we have all this right-wing
deregulation of Wall Street, and that was bipartisan. And the money is flowing in from these corporations to the leadership of both parties, the corporate Democrats.
But the one thing
Republicans.
that in Bill Clinton's defense and Al Fromm's defense, which makes me cringe, but nonetheless that we have to acknowledge.
I've never heard you say in Al Fromm's defense.
Is that these guys were looking at the death of the Democratic Party because the Reagan Revolution had destroyed the unions, and the unions were representing something like 50% of all the funding for the Democratic Party. So they were, so basically they said, okay, we're going to have to get into bed with the devil. This was before the internet. We're going to have to get in bed with the devil. Let's at least pick a devil that's tolerable. Let's get in bed with the banks and the insurance companies. They don't poison people or kill people.
They're not polluters.
And we'll let the Republicans have the polluters in the fossil fuel industry.
All right. Well, let me just say that you're never going to hear me say in defense of Al Fromm or Bill Clinton, but I'm glad you did. In this era, and the movie talks, in this era, there's no excuse.
That's right. It's no longer necessary.
Right. What Biden's doing, he's going to all these high-dollar fundraisers. They're going to be a super PAC. In the era of the...
Buttigieg.
Yes. Oh, no doubt. Mayor Pete, Biden, Klobuchar, they're looking for the big high dollars. You don't have to do that anymore. There's a different way. Bernie showed the way in 2016. Warren and Bernie are showing the way now. AOC showed the way.
Yep.
You can be a progressive Democrat, be well-funded, beat the Republicans, Republicans. There's no excuse for being a corporate Democrat
Okay,
anymore.
the movie is The Corporate Coup d'Etat. You can learn about it at jeffcohen.org. He's in Portland, Eugene, Ashland, and Florence, and Astoria.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Once again, jeffcohen.org. Check it out. We'll be back with your calls right after this. And welcome back. Let's pick up some phone calls here. Karen in Greenwood City, Wisconsin. Hey, Karen, thanks for listening to Free Speech TV. What's up?
Good afternoon. It's Glenwood City, Wisconsin, but that's okay.
Oh, Glenwood City. Yep, you're right. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. I'm calling to see how one person like Mitch McConnell can have so much power in the Senate to lock out any votes on all the bills that the Democrats have sent.
It's the way that the Senate rules are written. The Senate, every new session, the Senate, approves their rules, and the rules that they have right now make the Senate Majority Leader very, very, very powerful. And I'm pretty sure that those rules probably go back a long way, probably for most of my lifetime. So he's the guy who can be the stopgap, and it works to the advantage of the Republicans right now because they control the Senate. But if the Democrats take the Senate in the next election, a year from now, then it's going to work to the advantage of the Democrats.
Okay.
So I'm not sure I'd blow it up, but that's what's going on. It's just the Senate rules. Karen, thank you very much for the call. Maine in Chicago. Hey, Maine, you wanted to get back to education?
Yeah, I wanted to talk about, what Ocasio and her behind Bernie Sanders with free education and health care, and how these very ideologies philosophies go against capitalism, which is all about privatization of our democracy, and for their bottom line, which is profit.
Skimming the money off the top.
People.
Yep.
Right, and so we, as one to democratize, this is what I want. Okay, getting rid of we have to get rid of the electoral college.
I'm with you.
And in voodoo, Ragoon, trickle down economics.
Yep.
In order to have any kind of shot at a true democracy here in America.
I agree, Maine. I absolutely agree.
Yeah.
And we also have to get the money out of politics. I mean, that is just the most destructive thing. Thanks for the call. Valentino in Fresno, California. Hey, Valentino, what's up?
Hello, Tom. Nice to hear you. I'm glad I'm off work today so I can call you. Just wanted to riff about the Mueller report and the phone call with the Ukrainian president. Donald Trump. Will we ever see the unredacted version and the full transcript to that call?
Well, we probably won't see the unredacted version because some parts of it refer to classified information. But Congress is suing right now to get the unredacted version, which is insane. I mean, the whole thing was supposed to be a report to Congress. That was the whole point.
Yes.
Bill Barr is covering something up, and we need to know what the hell it was.
I would like them to, let us see it all, and then then we could really get some support, maybe some bipartisan support. Yeah. And I just feel like it's just if we got to know if there was real transparency, we would actually more favoritism for it. And I just heard earlier today on Stephen Miller that they should have started impeachment inquiry as soon as he was sworn in for violating the emolument clause. So
yeah, I agree.
What do you got to say about that?
I absolutely agree. Yeah, Valentino, thank you for the call. The problem is the word emoluments is something that most Americans have no idea what it means. It's a 17th or 18th century word. And, it's a word that we just don't use anymore. If you were to use a word like bribery or self-enrichment or hustling or skimming or embezzlement, something like that. We'll be right back. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And Tom in Temecula, California. Hey, Tom, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. First of all, congratulations on your new book.
Thank you.
I wanted to know how it feels to have written more books than Donald Trump has read in his lifetime.
It feels pretty good.
Good. Okay, to follow up on an earlier caller about the inheritance tax, which they like to call the death tax.
Right.
I think the Democrats should repurpose that and call it the lottery tax. It's, as you put it, the sperm lottery. So they should be taxed at the same rate as you or I would if we won the Powerball.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, yes, because it's, I refer to those people as members of the Lucky Sperm Club, and you're absolutely right. That's a good one, Tom. I love that messaging. Thank you for that. Jim, listening on WBAI in Brick Township, New Jersey. Hey, Jim, what's up?
Yes, hi. Actually, I mentioned to your receptionist I wanted to talk about the Electoral College. But I would also like to just make a little plug as far as labels go. The difference, we've been hearing Warren emphasizing she's a capitalist, and I would say that in Europe, the Germans and the Northern Europeans often subscribe to what is called Rhenish capitalism, which has a social dynamic in it, not just market dynamics. I urge everyone to
It's a phrase I'm not familiar with.
My point, Pelosi's been using the phrase of Tom Paine, the times have found us.
Yes.
And
although I couldn't, I went looking for that in Tom Paine's literature writings the other day, and I couldn't find it, but I still like it.
Okay. Well, I didn't look it up either, but I like the Federalist paper. If anybody reads that, I mean, it certainly is caught up. I mean, number 68 is speaking to now. Hamilton had a fear, concern of a creature of popularity and foreign influence becoming the magistrate or president, and that's where we're at. I suggest, and I'm more in the camp, I'm not a subscriber to the celebrity culture, but we've unfortunately had the Electoral College become just a rubber stamp and anonymous members up until the last 16 years. And who are these people? You're voting for them. We're a representational republic, not a true democracy. Why don't we have a celebrity culture where, if Cardi B or Alec Baldwin, make them the delegates?
I love it. Yeah, there you go. Thank you, Jim. That's fascinating. We'll be back Monday. Oh, it's Friday, isn't it? Hey, have a great weekend. And a wonderful, blessed, happy weekend. I hope you have time to spend with family and friends. But in the meantime, tell your friends about Progressive Media. However you're getting this show, you need to tell people about it. If you're getting on a commercial radio station, tell the advertisers you appreciate it. And don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires you. Get out there, get active, tag you're it. And be sure to go to jeffcohen.org and check out this new movie, The Corporate Coup d'etat.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
We say fight back!
Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere.